If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21. None of them are good people. Lily gathered her stack of books again, then hesitated and set them back down. Actually, I'm looking for sources for a potions essay, she said. Professor Slughorn assigned a review on how Moonstone works in calming drafts. He wants at least 3 primary references. She stared at the pile with a troubled expression. But I don't know how to organize it. All these books say roughly the same thing, but not quite. Regulus glanced at her. He knew young witches and wizards had never been taught how to write this kind of paper. How do you usually write essays? He asked. Well. Lily hesitated. I copy what the books say and add my own understanding. Regulus pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit with him. There's a structured way of writing papers used in Muggle universities, he said. The moment she heard Muggle universities, Lily's eyes lit up. First, Regulus continued, don't start writing right away. Read through all your materials. Note down every useful point and mark the source. Lily blinked, listening intently. Regulus tore a blank sheet of parchment from his notebook and ripped it into small strips. For example, he said, writing as he spoke, Moonstone's lunar magic can neutralize residual agitation from nightmare grass. Moonlight and Potions, page 147. In the corner, he wrote Source 1. Now you have one discrete piece of information. Once you've gathered enough, you sort them. Properties. Preparation methods. Side effects. Lily's eyes widened. And then? Then you look for the relationships between them. Regulus tapped his wand lightly, and the parchment slips floated into the air. Say Book A says Moonstone should be ground into powder. Book B insists it must be sliced. Book C uses it whole, steeped intact. At that point, you ask why. Different recipes? Different schools of thought? Or maybe the authors studied Moonstone from different regions. The slips rearranged themselves in midair. When you find the reason for the differences, your essay gains depth. Finally, you connect everything with your own logic. Considering factor X, author A's view applies better in situation Y, while author B's method is superior under condition Z. Therefore, a combined recommendation would be. Lily was completely absorbed. She pulled out her own parchment and quill, scribbling the steps down as fast as she could. Skim, source, categorize, find connections, build logic. She looked up, thrilled. This is amazing. Can I tell other people? My friends are struggling with their essays too. Regulus nodded. You can. Just don't say I taught you. She stopped writing and looked at him, confused. Why not? Because I'm a Slytherin, and you're a Gryffindor, Regulus said calmly. Some boundaries don't need to be crossed deliberately. And there's no need to provoke anything. If your friends ask, say you saw it in a Muggle library. A Slytherin sharing Muggle methods was taboo among pure-blood circles, especially in the current climate. But he believed Lily would keep the secret. She understood the importance of boundaries. It was also a test. Whether she could keep a promise mattered. After a moment of thought, Lily understood his meaning. As a pure-blood Slytherin, he shouldn't be the one to discover, promote, or spread Muggle approaches, even if they worked. She nodded firmly. I understand. Thank you, Black. You're welcome. Lily packed up her things and headed off. At the end of the shelves, she turned back. You know, she said, if you were in Gryffindor, we might have become very good friends. Regulus looked up at her earnest expression. His voice was quiet. Friends aren't divided by houses, Miss Evans. Lily smiled, bright as sunlight breaking through clouds. Then, goodbye, Regulus. Goodbye, Lily. The red-haired girl disappeared between the shelves. Regulus stayed seated, knowing someone else would come. 5 minutes later, a cold voice emerged from the shadows. Stay away from her. Severus Snape stepped out from between 2 shelves, his black robes nearly blending into the darkness. He looked paler than usual, lips pressed into a thin line. Something restrained and furious churned in his dark eyes. Regulus stopped what he was doing and met his gaze calmly. Snape. Can I help you? I said, stay away from Lily, Snape hissed, his voice low and sharp, like a snake tasting the air. Your tricks are obvious. Pretending to be gentle. Pretending to be different. All to gain her trust, And then? And then what? Regulus cut in. Use her? Hurt her. Snape took a step forward, fingers tightening at his sleeve. You think you're better than the rest of them? You think I don't see what you're doing? Regulus let out a quiet breath. Snape, you were watching the whole time, weren't you? Watching Lily talk to me. Watching her smile. Watching her leave. And then you came out to warn me. He looked straight at him. Do you think that's protecting her? Or is it that you can't stand seeing her show kindness to anyone but you? Snape's face twisted. You. Let me finish. Regulus lifted a hand, small and controlled. You're angry not because I might hurt Lily. You know I won't. At least not now. You're angry because Lily chose to talk to me. Because she smiled at me. Because she looked like she was willing to trust a Slytherin who wasn't you. He leaned back slightly. You want to be the only wizard she trusts. The special one. The one who understands her completely. Snape's breathing grew ragged. His fingers trembled. The truth had landed. Regulus shook his head, his tone cooling. Today she talks to me. Tomorrow she might brew potions with James Potter. At the name, Snape's pupil shrank. His fingers almost curled around his wand. See? Regulus said quietly. I only said his name, and you lost control. I'll give you some advice, Snape. If you truly care about Lily, don't try to control who she talks to or befriends. All that does is push her farther away. Let her choose to stay by your side. Don't force it by driving everyone else off. Snape stood rigid, his body taut beneath the robes. After several seconds, he finally spoke. What would you know, a pure-blood heir like you could never understand. I understand more than you think, Regulus interrupted, meeting his eyes. I understand pure-blood arrogance. I understand the struggle of half-bloods. I understand the isolation of Muggleborns. None of that excuses what you're doing. He stood and walked past Snape without another glance. Warning me. He said lightly. He retrieved astrological meditation and headed toward Madame Pance's desk, leaving Snape alone in the shadows. As he walked, Regulus reflected that Snape was a contradiction. Brilliant talent, trapped by inferiority and possessiveness. Craving power. Drawn to darkness. In the original story, he only woke up after losing Lily, when it was already too late. Today's words might not sink in. If Snape was smart enough, he would start to reflect. If not, then at least he now knew Regulus wasn't his enemy. The irony was that Snape's fixation on Lily was his greatest weakness. Voldemort would exploit it. Dumbledore would too. Perhaps when everyone else tried to use that obsession, the one person who didn't would gain something unexpected. And speaking of Snape inevitably led to James Potter. In Regulus's view, Lily's so-called destined match was little more than a disposable character. A schoolyard bully who happened to repent later, join the right side, and was then celebrated as a hero. Rewarded with love. With friendship. With family. With posthumous honor. The world could be deeply ironic. Good and evil, hero and villain, were often judged not by what you'd done, but by where you stood at the end. Snape wasn't a good man. Potter was no better. From some angles, Potter was worse. Regulus let the thought go. Since this world embraced redemption arcs, there was no need to dwell on it. Madame Pance examined the book. Astrological meditation. Obscure. 2-week loan period. That's enough, Regulus said, signing his name. When he left the library, torches were already lit along the castle corridors, their flickering light stretching long shadows across the stone walls. Chapter 22, Astrological Meditation. By mid-September, the morning fog in the Scottish Highlands had yet to fully lift. The History of Magic classroom on the third floor of the castle was already packed with bleary-eyed first years. When Professor Binns drifted into the room, almost no one looked up. Hogwarts' oldest professor began the day's lecture in his usual dry, unchanging monotone. Today, we will continue our discussion of the Goblin Rebellion of 1612. The uprising began at the Three Broomsticks in Hogsmeade Village, when the Goblin leader, Regulus, found himself watching the professor instead of listening. Professor Binns was translucent. When sunlight passed through him, it left only the faintest shadow on the stone floor beneath the lectern. What caught Regulus's attention wasn't the sight, but the magic. Other professors' magic felt like living things. Flowing flames. A deep, still lake. Something vigorous and warm. Professor Binz's magic was almost non-existent. Or more precisely, nearly impossible to perceive. Regulus closed his eyes and focused his magical senses toward the lectern. A normal wizard's magic was like ripples on water, with a clear center and edge. Professor Binz's magic felt more like a thin fog. Even, diffuse and stable. No rise or fall. No core. It blended so seamlessly with the surroundings that it was hard to tell where it ended. As a child, Regulus had read that the soul was the source of magic. A ghost had to be sustained by something. So what did a ghost's magic look like? A concept from his past life surfaced. The conversion between matter and energy. When a wizard died, the body vanished and the soul remained. What happened to magic? Did it shift from being anchored to the body to being anchored to the soul? Professor Binz continued droning on about goblins using counterfeit galleons to destabilize Gringotts. Regulus looked out the window. The fog was thinning, revealing a sliver of dark green forest in the distance. His thoughts wandered farther. If ghosts were remnants of the soul, then what was the difference, magically speaking, between a complete soul and a fragment? Was Voldemort's pursuit of immortality an attempt to bypass the process of bodily death followed by soul remnants? By splitting the soul? He didn't have enough knowledge to draw a conclusion. When the bell rang, Professor Binz had just reached the part where the rebellion was ultimately suppressed by the Ministry of Magic. He didn't say a word about dismissal. He simply drifted straight through the wall, leaving behind a roomful of students who were still half asleep. At 2 in the afternoon, sunlight poured across the eastern side of the library. Madame Pants patrolled the shelves in silence, sharp-eyed and vigilant. Regulus planned to linger near the outer edge of the restricted section. By Hogwarts rules, first years weren't allowed to borrow books from the restricted section, or even enter it. But not being allowed to borrow didn't mean not being allowed to look. The shelves weren't fully sealed. From a distance, you could still make out some of the titles on the spines. Madame Pants made a full circuit of the library every 30 minutes, and she always paused longer near the restricted section. Regulus timed it carefully. He walked toward the area at an even pace, holding a copy of Changes in Medieval Magical Law as if he were just passing through. His gaze swept the shelves and only stopped near the deepest end. There sat a thick, leather-bound volume with frayed edges. The lettering on the spine was worn but still legible. A Brief History of Soul Magic. The author's name had been rubbed away. Regulus tried to turn the page with magic alone. No spells. Just raw control. He compressed his magic into a thread-thin strand and pushed it toward the restricted section. It failed. The instant his magic crossed the boundary, it was violently dispersed by a vast, heavy force. He was about to try again when a cold voice sounded behind him. "Mr. Black!" Regulus snapped all his magic back at once and turned to face the librarian. "Madame Pants." "You stood in front of the restricted section for a full minute," Madame Pants said, her gaze sharp as a blade. "First-year students are forbidden from interacting with it. I trust you know the rules." "Yes, ma'am." Regulus lifted the book in his hand. "I was looking for reference material. I passed by and couldn't help being impressed by the size of the collection. Hogwarts Library is remarkable." His tone was sincere. His expression held nothing but genuine hunger for knowledge. Madame Pants's expression softened by a fraction, though her eyes remained wary. "The books in the restricted section are sealed for a reason. Much of that knowledge is not suitable for young witches and wizards. Return to your seat." "Of course, ma'am." Regulus inclined his head slightly and turned toward the potions shelves. "I need that book," he thought. As the library slowly grew more crowded, Regulus packed up his things and headed back to the Slytherin common room to finish his potions essay. At 11 that night, the Slytherin dormitory was silent. Cuthbert Avery was already asleep, his breathing steady and even. A faint glow still shone from behind Alex's curtains. He was probably previewing tomorrow's charms lesson. Hermes's curtains were drawn tight. No sound came from within, but Regulus knew he wasn't asleep yet. Regulus pulled his own dark green curtains closed and cast a soundproofing charm. Then he sat cross-legged on his bed and closed his eyes. Astrological meditation lay open on his knees, turned to the 3rd chapter. Resonating with Orion. According to the book, Orion was the king of the winter sky. The 3 stars of his belt embodied balance and strength. The meditator was meant to locate Orion in the night sky, touch the 3 stars with magic, feel the pulse of their starlight, and eventually synchronize their own magic circulation with the rhythm of the constellation. Typical wizard mysticism, Regulus thought. He'd tried it 3 times. Every attempt had failed. The method wasn't wrong. He'd followed the steps exactly. Sense the night sky. Locate the constellation. Extend magical tendrils. And got nothing. He couldn't feel any so-called starlight pulse at all. Constellations were just visual projections of distant stars. There was no real connection between them. Where would a pulse come from? And yet, the method clearly worked for the author. Maybe the author had some special talent. An ability to perceive things others couldn't. Regulus didn't have that. So he would replace it with what he did have. An adult's way of thinking. A foundation in basic astrophysics. Sensitivity to geometry and mathematics. Microscopic level control over magic. Computational ability that bordered on absurd. And his magical perception. He needed a new approach. First, abandon sensing the real night sky. If anything, Regulus suspected the author had written the book just to show off. I have what you don't. You couldn't see the sky from the Slytherin dormitory, but that didn't matter. He used magic to construct a constellation model in his mind. Magic flowed deep within his consciousness, sketching the first point. Betelgeuse, the red giant marking Orion's right shoulder. Then Rigel. Bellatrix. One point after another, lighting up the darkness of his inner vision. Using memorized star chart data, he built a 3-dimensional model, scaled by real relative positions and brightness. It was exhausting. Maintaining the precise placement of 12 points at once steadily drained both magic and focus. But Regulus held on. Next came the connections. Magic condensed into fine threads. From Betelgeuse to Bellatrix, forming the right arm. From Rigel to Scythe, forming the left. The 3 belt stars linked by parallel lines. A glowing Orion took shape in his mind. Clean proportions. Smooth lines. Then came synchronization. This was the core. The book's method relied on following the constellation's pulse. Regulus had no pulse to follow, but he had a model. He imagined his own magic circulation as a luminous river. Then he embedded the Orion model into that river, letting the constellation's geometry become part of the riverbed. As magic flowed past Betelgeuse, its speed adjusted slightly. At Orion's belt, it split into 3 thin streams, moving in parallel. Across the whole structure, it traced the constellation's outer contours. At first, it was stiff. The magic resisted the imposed structure, and the model wavered. The points flickered. Regulus slowed the flow, smoothing the circulation. At the same time, he refined the model. The belt stars shouldn't form a perfect straight line. A subtle curve was needed. Betelgeuse was 1.3 times brighter than Rigel. That point should exert stronger pull. Perhaps the flow should intensify proportionally as magic passed through it. He kept adjusting. Gradually, the resistance eased. The magic began to adapt to the structure, aided by the countless hours he'd already spent training magic circulation. Like water finding a new channel. Artificial, but smooth enough. 1 cycle. 2. 3. Regulus opened his eyes and let out a quiet breath. He examined himself. The speed of his magic circulation hadn't increased, but it was steadier. The ripples felt smoothed down. With a thought, an invisible, heavy barrier snapped into place around his body. He held it for a full minute, then let it dissolve. A moment later, he reached a conclusion. Magic consumption was unchanged. Recovery speed had improved. The change was slight, but undeniably real. It worked. Chapter 23, Herbology. On the 3rd Thursday of late September, morning dew clung to the greenhouse glass in fine beads. First year herbology was held in Greenhouse 3, home to relatively safe magical plants. Safe, at least, when handled correctly. Today, we'll be learning how to process bubotubers, Professor Sprout said, standing before a row of clay pots. She wore thick dragon-hide gloves. Her round face was flushed in the humid warmth of the greenhouse. Who can tell me what bubotuber pus is used for? A Hufflepuff boy shot his hand into the air. It treats severe acne, Professor, but it has to be heavily diluted. Otherwise it causes even worse boils. Exactly right. 5 points to Hufflepuff, Professor Sprout said with a nod. Now, pair up. Each of you will receive 1 bubotuber, a pair of gloves, and a glass bottle. Your task is to extract the pus safely and collect it in the bottle. Be careful not to splash it on your skin or robes. Regulus was paired with Cuthbert. Cuthbert wrinkled his nose as he accepted the pot. That thing is ugly. He wasn't wrong. The bubotuber was a dark brown, bulbous mass, its surface covered in knobby swellings. Each bump ended in a tiny pore, slowly oozing a thick yellow-green fluid. Put your gloves on, Regulus said, already sliding his dragon-hide gloves into place. He lifted his tuber and focused his magical senses. All matter carried magic. That much he knew. Porcupine quills concentrated magic at their tips. But bubotubers. His perception sank inward. The first thing he sensed was life. All plants possessed a slow, steady life flow, like a muted heartbeat. But woven into the bubotuber's life magic was something else. A sharp feedback pricked his awareness. The plant's overall magic was stable, but around the swollen nodes, the magic churned in disorder. The pus itself radiated even stronger turbulence, mixed with something unfamiliar. An emotion. Regulus studied the plant more closely. Pain. The word surfaced unbidden. Not pain in the complex, layered sense humans experienced. More like a raw, instinctive distress. The kind of emergency response a living organism produced when injured, etched directly into its magical signature. What are you staring at? Cuthbert had already filled half his bottle. The yellow-green liquid slid sluggishly along the glass. Hurry up. This stuff smells foul. Regulus nodded. He pinched one of the larger swellings between thumb and forefinger and applied gentle pressure. Pop. Thick pus spilled out and dripped into the bottle. In that instant, Regulus caught the shift. The chaotic magic around the swelling eased, while a sharp spike of discomfort rippled through the plant as a whole, then gradually settled. Like lancing a boil. A brief surge of pain, followed by relief. He squeezed 3 more nodes, observing the same pattern each time. On the 4th, he looked up at Professor Sprout as she made her rounds. Professor. She approached at once. Yes, Mr. Black. The bubotuber, Regulus said, hesitating slightly. When it secretes pus, does it experience some form of distress? I mean, from a magical perspective, the secretion seems to be accompanied by a pain response. Regulus had a habit of asking strange questions. Questions that, to most young witches and wizards, sounded like nonsense. Every word familiar, yet incomprehensible when put together. But the students had begun to notice a pattern. Those baffling questions often struck directly at something the professors cared about, earning Regulus praise and extra house points. It had become a familiar sight in Slytherin classes. By now, Regulus's reputation preceded him. Nearby students turned to look at him almost in unison, hands pausing mid-squeeze. Cuthbert's expression was the most complicated of all. He frowned at his inscrutable roommate, that familiar mix of confusion and quiet frustration rising again. He couldn't understand what went on inside the second son of the Black family's head. Where did these thoughts come from? Some obscure book? Or did Regulus simply reason them out on his own? What unsettled Cuthbert most was that Regulus never asked at random. Every question landed with purpose. Compared to him, everyone else suddenly felt like idiots reciting instructions without ever thinking deeper. The Hufflepuffs sitting a short distance away, however, looked less alienated and more openly curious. They exchanged glances. Discomfort? Pain? Plants could feel things? Professor Sprout's eyes widened. She took a few quick steps toward Regulus, her voice bright with surprise. You noticed that? Yes, Professor. Regulus inclined his head politely. The magic in the pus is highly unstable, and when pressure is applied, the plant's overall magic fluctuates briefly. It's similar to the magical response animals show when injured. Professor Sprout studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Very few students recognize this at first-year level. Most see bubotubers as nothing more than ingredient sources. She straightened and addressed the class. Mr. Black has raised an important point. Many magical plants possess simple emotions. Bubotuber pus is, at its core, a defensive mechanism. The secretion process places a burden on the plant itself. That's why, when harvesting, we should be as gentle as possible and minimize their discomfort. She demonstrated, pressing slowly with the pads of her fingers rather than squeezing roughly. A considerate harvester produces purer ingredients, Professor Sprout said. This is one of herbology's first lessons, and one many forget. 10 points to Slytherin, for careful observation. Cuthbert leaned closer and muttered, "How could you even tell? I just thought it was disgusting." "Focus, reading, and a bit of talent," Regulus replied simply, continuing with the remaining notes. At the same time, his thoughts turned inward. Plants had emotions, however primitive. What did that imply? If emotions could imprint themselves onto magic, could magic carry more complex emotional states? Could it be used to harm, or to heal? As the lesson entered its latter half, students began cleaning their tools. Regulus rinsed the glass bottle, removed his gloves, and walked over to where Professor Sprout was rearranging the plant racks. "Professor, I have another question." "Go on, my dear." "It's about mandrakes," Regulus said. "I've read that an adult mandrake's cry is fatal to humans. I'm wondering whether that lethality acts on the body, or the mind." Professor Sprout paused and turned to face him, her expression growing serious. "That's an advanced topic. We usually cover mandrakes in detail in later years." "I know, Professor, but I'm curious," Regulus said, polite but firm. "If simply blocking your ears prevents death, then the danger lies in hearing the sound. Does the sound itself carry magic, or does it trigger some reaction within the listener?" Professor Sprout didn't answer immediately. She gestured for Regulus to follow her to a quiet corner of the greenhouse, where a few wicker chairs sat. Once they were seated, she spoke. "To answer your first question, it's both. A mandrake's cry contains a powerful form of mental impact magic. It directly interferes with the listener's soul stability, causing a collapse of consciousness. That is the mental cause of death. At the same time, such a collapse triggers physical chain reactions. Cardiac arrest, respiratory failure, magical destabilization. In the end, death results from both mental and physical breakdown." Regulus nodded, absorbing the explanation quickly. "Then how do protective earmuffs work? Do they block the sound entirely, or weaken the magical transmission?" "An excellent question." The approval in Professor Sprout's eyes deepened. "Standard earmuffs use a sound filtering charm. It removes the specific magical component, the lethal factor in the mandrake's cry. So strictly speaking, you can still hear it. What you hear is a purified, harmless version." Regulus's thoughts raced. "Which means the mandrake's lethality lies in the magic carried by the sound. Then, is it possible to reverse it?" Professor Sprout's expression sharpened. "What are you thinking, child?" "Treatment," Regulus said, not entirely falsely. "If a type of magic can destroy, could it be adjusted to repair? For example, could a similar but inverted magic be used to heal mental trauma?" Chapter 24, Natural Magic and Mandrakes. "This is an extremely dangerous field," Professor Sprout said slowly. "Sound-based magic, especially when it involves the mind, sits at the boundary between advanced dark magic and advanced healing magic. Historically, there have been witches and wizards who researched therapeutic sound. Most of those experiments ended in tragedy. Because it's hard to control. Because sound is intangible and diffuse," Professor Sprout explained. "You can precisely guide a spell's trajectory. Sound spreads on its own. And every soul has subtle differences. A treatment that works for you might be lethal to me. There is no universal solution." "No universal solution," Regulus noted silently. "But sound could be focused. Physics had proven that much. There was no reason magic couldn't do the same. If there was no universal solution, then what about individual calibration? If a soul could be detected, measured, adjusted to? And more importantly, if treatment had to be personalized, then what about lethality? That could be scaled." Aloud, Regulus asked, "One more question, Professor. If a mandrake's cry is that dangerous, why isn't the mandrake itself affected? And how do mandrakes interact with each other?" Professor Sprout smiled. "You're brushing up against N.E.W.T level research now. The short answer is that mandrakes have their own form of immunity. Their auditory perception isn't the same as a wizard's. As for communication, we don't actually know if they need it. No one has successfully translated mandrake language yet. At least, no one who lived to publish the results." She stood and brushed soil from her robes. "Keep your curiosity, Mr. Black. Just remember, until you have sufficient knowledge and protection, don't experiment lightly." "I understand, Professor." "Thank you," Regulus said sincerely. He stood as well, several lines of thought already branching in his mind. Wide area lethality. Precision lethality. Mental damage. Physical damage. And if time allowed, mental healing was worth pursuing too. The bell rang. Students began filing out of the greenhouse. Regulus deliberately packed his things more slowly, waiting until the others were gone. "Mr. Black," Professor Sprout called, as expected. "Could you stay a moment longer?" "Of course, Professor." They walked out of the greenhouse and onto the gravel path outside the castle. September wind carried a lingering warmth, and ripples spread across the surface of the Black Lake in the distance. "Your magical perception is unusual," Professor Sprout said without preamble. "Most witches and wizards sense magic the way they see color. They know it's there. They can tell strength apart. But they struggle to describe detail. For me, it's like an extra sense," Regulus answered carefully. "I can perceive the emotions in a bubotuber. Or more precisely, I feel them." He chose partial honesty. Professor Sprout was the head of Hufflepuff, known for her fairness and deep understanding of plant magic. She was worth a measure of trust. And his ability, while strong, wasn't unique in principle. Professor Sprout looked back toward the greenhouses. "In the deepest section of Greenhouse 2, there's a whomping willow sapling. I planted it 30 years ago, during a difficult period of my life. That tree is still more aggressive than others of its kind. More volatile. I've always suspected my emotions affected it." She sighed, then looked at Regulus seriously. "So here's my advice. Stay sensitive, but don't delve too deeply into dark plants. Some plants, like Devil's Snare or Venomous Tentacula, especially those bred through dark magic, accumulate pain, rage, and despair. That emotional residue can rebound onto the person sensing them." Her gaze sharpened. "Your talent is a gift. It can also be a curse. If you ever encounter something too dark while sensing magic, cut the connection immediately. Come to me, or another professor. Don't carry it alone." "I'll remember that, Professor," Regulus said, meeting her eyes and nodding steadily. He could tell her warning came from experience. She had seen cases like that before. Possibly tragedies. "And one more thing," Professor Sprout added, her tone softening. "If you're interested in plant magic research, you may apply to assist me after your owls. For now, focus on your fundamentals. Everything in the textbooks matters." "I will. Off you go. Don't be late to your next class." That evening, with an hour free before dinner, Regulus took a detour to a small garden on the west side of the castle. It held ordinary ornamental plants. Nothing magical. Few people ever came here. He needed to test an idea. Daisies were commonly used as base ingredients in simple potions. He found two growing side by side. One was healthy and full. The other had 3 outer leaves with yellowed, withered edges. Pest damage, perhaps. Or poor nutrients. He crouched, placing his right hand on the soil near the healthy daisy's roots, his left near the damaged one. He closed his eyes and expanded his magical perception. The healthy daisy's magic was warm and steady, a soft pale gold, like a slowly turning halo. The damaged daisy's magic was far dimmer. Its light flickered, and in the withered leaves, the magic had nearly stalled. Regulus intended to guide the healthy plant's life magic to repair the damaged one. This wasn't a healing spell. Healing spells forced the caster's magic into the target. What he wanted was to act as a conduit, letting magic flow naturally between plants. He extended his own magic into 2 fine threads. One linked to the healthy daisy's core. The other to the damaged area. The threads were extremely thin, careful not to interfere with either plant's magic circulation. At the healthy end, he gently drew magic, creating a high-pressure region. At the damaged end, he lowered the pressure. Like water flowing downhill, the magic should move on its own. Nothing happened. The 2 plants' magic remained separate, ignoring the pressure gradient entirely. Regulus adjusted his approach. He remembered the emotional imprint of the bubotuber. Perhaps raw magical pressure wasn't enough. Perhaps plants responded better to instinctive patterns. He altered his output, mimicking the healthy daisy's natural fluctuations. 5 minutes passed. Then something changed. A faint golden thread of light emerged from the healthy daisy's core and began moving along Regulus's magical conduit. Slowly. The thread reached the damaged area and seeped into the yellowed leaves. Regulus held his breath and watched. Inside the leaf, magic stirred. Dormant nodes reactivated, beginning a slow, tentative circulation. It worked. But the efficiency was abysmal. After 10 minutes, he'd restored only about a tenth of a single leaf, while his own magic reserves had taken a noticeable hit. He pushed on for 5 more minutes, then carefully severed the connection and withdrew his magic. On the damaged daisy, the outermost leaf showed a narrow ring of restored green, about the width of a fingernail. That was all. Regulus stood and rubbed his brow. The cost was far too high for the result. But the direction was correct. One key hypothesis had been confirmed. Plant magic could be transferred between individuals. More than that, natural magic, even the magic within seemingly passive life like plants, could be guided, borrowed, and even directed by a wizard's will. Mandrakes. If the gentle life magic of a daisy could be guided, then what about a magical plant that carried lethal power? Did mandrakes follow the same underlying principle? His thoughts accelerated, a structured idea taking shape. Reverse analysis of mandrake lethality based on guided plant magic. A mandrake's cry is fatal because it carries destructive magic targeting both soul and body. That magic, carried by sound, is fundamentally the same category as the daisy's life magic or the chaotic magic in bubotuber pus. It is magic generated, held, or released by a plant. The difference lies in its extreme nature. If daisy magic can be guided and transferred, then mandrake magic should, in theory, also be guidable. The obstacle is qualitative. One nourishes. One annihilates. Mandrakes release their lethal magic through sound, a method inherent to their life form. To bypass the cry and access or guide the source directly may require understanding how mandrake magic circulates internally. Where it gathers. How it moves. Perhaps the correct starting point was mandrake seedlings. Observing how their magic evolved as they grew. That was where the answer likely waited. Chapter 25, Bones, and a small secret between roommates. By the time Regulus left the small garden, the sky had already darkened. Lights flickered on one by one in the castle windows. Dinner was close. He quickened his pace, only to run into someone at the entrance to the greenhouse area. A Hufflepuff girl. 2nd year, maybe 3rd. Light brown hair twisted into a loose bun. She was crouched in front of a row of pots, carefully loosening the soil around a white dittany whose leaves were starting to droop. "You'll damage the lateral roots if you do it like that," Regulus said without thinking, stopping short. The girl looked up and blinked. "What?" "The angle of your trowel," Regulus said, pointing at the small metal spade in her hand. White dittany roots spread outward. They don't grow straight down. Digging vertically cuts the side roots. She glanced back down, then her eyes lit up. "That explains why it's been struggling, thank you." She adjusted her grip, sliding the trowel in at an angle and gently loosening the surrounding soil. "You're a first-year Slytherin, right?" she asked as she worked. "It's rare to see Slytherins who know herbology this well." "Regulus Black." "First year," he said. "I'm Eleanor Bones." "3rd year." She smiled, one canine tooth peeking out. "The Bones family. You've probably heard of us." Then, with open curiosity rather than caution, she added, "I know who you are too. Hogwarts 2nd Black. Before you arrived, a lot of people were guessing whether you'd follow 500 years of Black family tradition and go to Slytherin, or end up in Gryffindor like your brother." Regulus lifted a brow, mildly surprised. He knew his sorting had been watched closely. By students, by pure-blood families, even by some professors. Sirius's choice hadn't just been personal rebellion. It had shattered a 5-century pattern. 500 years was long enough for Black equals Slytherin to become an unspoken rule in the wizarding world. And in a time when old families were quietly reassessing their positions, the sorting of a Black heir could easily be read as a signal. Regulus had known all that from the start. He also knew the speculation wouldn't stop. In the original timeline, it wouldn't stop until the Black family was nearly gone. Still, this was the first time someone had brought it up to his face so directly. Eleanor Bones was more straightforward than any other pureblood he'd met so far. And of course, he knew the Bones family. One of the Sacred 28. Moderately aligned, with many members working at the Ministry of Magic. Eleanor was likely related to Amelia Bones, the future head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Regulus didn't dodge the topic. His grey eyes met hers calmly. "Looks like the answer's Slytherin. People can stop guessing now." Eleanor blinked, then laughed. Fair enough. And it seems you're doing just fine there. Regulus didn't pursue the subject. Instead, he gestured at the pot. White Dittany likes loose soil, but it hates being disturbed too often. You should add a layer of broken clay shards at the bottom for drainage. The soil in this pot holds too much water. The roots will rot. She stared at him. How can you tell the soil's holding too much water? The leaf edges are curling slightly and the color's gone too dark. That's poor root respiration. And when you loosened the soil earlier, it clumped together. That means excess moisture. Merlin, you're right. Eleanor stood, brushing dirt from her hands. I've been using the standard soil mix, but maybe this batch of leaf mold was bad. Thank you for the advice, Mr. Black. Regulus gave a small nod. Under the fading light, they spent a few minutes trading tips. Eleanor showed him how to judge soil density by touch, and talked about cultivating a few uncommon magical plants. In return, Regulus shared several simple soil testing charms from household garden magic. Practical little tricks. Once she packed up her tools, Eleanor glanced toward the castle. We should head to the Great Hall. Walk together. Sure. They headed back side by side. A few Hufflepuffs passed them on the path, surprise flickering across their faces at the sight of Eleanor chatting with a Slytherin, but no one said anything. At the hall entrance, Eleanor waved. Good night, Mr. Black. Good night, Miss Bones. Regulus went to the Slytherin table. As he sat down, Cuthbert leaned over. What were you talking about with someone from the Bones family? Herbology, Regulus said, reaching for the roast meat. The earlier experiment had drained him more than expected. The Bones family's not bad, Cuthbert said. But that Amelia Bones at the ministry is too rigid. My father can't stand her. Maybe she can't stand Mr. Avery either, Regulus said. Cuthbert thought it over, then shrugged. You've got a point. Dash. Just past midnight, Regulus snapped awake. A ripple in magic. He instantly drew in his magic, slowed his breathing, and lay still, one eye barely open. Across the room, Hermes Mulciber's bed curtains lifted soundlessly. A black-robed figure slipped out, landing without a whisper. Hermes stood in the dark, checking something. He even paused beside each bed, including Regulus's. After a minute, he left the dormitory. Regulus waited 3 minutes before sitting up. He crossed to Hermes's bed. The curtains were still parted slightly. He didn't touch anything. He scanned with magic alone. The bed was neatly made. A book lay under the pillow, bound in dark red leather with no title. Protective charms layered it. Forcing a look would trigger an alarm. On the bedside table sat an empty glass vial. A trace of black liquid clung to the bottom. Regulus couldn't identify it, but it wasn't a standard potion. Hermes's schoolbag rested near the window, zipper not fully closed. A corner of parchment showed. No protective magic. Regulus slid a thin probe of magic inside. A hand-drawn map. Crude lines, but clear labels. Hogwarts' main structure sat at the center. Several areas were circled. A corridor on the right side of the 4th floor, marked, searched, nothing found. An abandoned classroom area on the west side of the dungeons, wards present, need to break. And a room beneath the astronomy tower, labeled, possible entrance, unverified. Beneath the astronomy tower? There shouldn't be a room there. Just the outer wall. Unless it was hidden. Or a passage. Regulus withdrew his magic and returned to his bed. What was Hermes Mulciber searching for? Or who was he searching for it for? An hour later, at 1:14 a.m., the door opened again. Hermes slipped back inside. His steps were heavier this time. Fresh scorch marks marred the hem of his robe. A thin red cut crossed the back of his left hand, like a slice from something sharp. He paused in the doorway, eyes moving over the 3 beds. Satisfied, he went to his own. As he removed his outer robe, a faint sulfur smell reached Regulus. Magical flame. Or residue from some alchemical reaction. Hermes closed the curtains. Soft rustling followed. Then silence. Regulus stared up at the dark canopy above him. First year. 11 years old. Already involved in dangerous secrets. The Mulciber family is a pure-blood family. For generations, they dealt in rare magical artifacts. In reality, that meant brokering dark objects, smuggling, and private collections. They specialized in operating along the edges of the law, with quiet ties to shops in Nocturne Alley. No interest in politics. Only in forbidden knowledge and dangerous items. They didn't openly support Voldemort, but they supplied the Death Eaters under the table. Was Hermes acting on personal curiosity? Or carrying out a family task? If it was the latter, then whatever he was searching for was likely tied to the coming war. An owl hooted somewhere outside, distant and indistinct. Regulus let the thought settle. He would keep watching. He closed his eyes and began another cycle of magic circulation. In his mind, Orion's geometric form lit up once more, star-like magic flowing along carefully calculated paths. Chapter 26, Foundations. Thursday night's astronomy class was held at the highest point of the castle, the astronomy tower. By late September, the night sky over the Scottish Highlands was clear and sharp, the air cold enough to feel almost transparent. Tonight, we'll be learning how to identify the guiding star of the night sky, Sirius, Professor Aurora Sinistra said, her voice as soft as the night wind. She was an older witch, her silver hair neatly pinned into a bun. Tiny constellations were embroidered along the hem of her robes, and when she moved, it was as if starlight drifted with her. Sirius is not only the brightest star visible at night. In magical theory, it's also seen as a symbol of guidance and loyalty. Many ancient navigation charms and long-distance communication spells rely on observations of it for alignment. The students worked in pairs, adjusting telescopes mounted on brass stands. Regulus was paired with Alex Rosier. Cuthbert loudly declared that he had zero interest in staring at dots of light all night, and quickly slunk off with a few other Slytherin boys to yawn in a corner. "Start by leveling the base," Regulus said quietly, watching Alex fumble with the adjustments. "Right. Center the bubble, then loosen the vertical lock. Aim southeast, elevation about 20 degrees. Alex followed his instructions and peered through the eyepiece. "It's all blurry. You haven't adjusted the focus yet." Regulus reached out and gently turned the knob on the tube. "Slowly. Look for a very bright star with a bluish-white tint." After a moment, Alex let out a soft gasp. "I see it. It's so bright. Like a blue-white gem. It's beautiful. That's Sirius." Regulus moved to the neighboring telescope. He calibrated and focused it with practiced ease, the star snapping into clarity. Through a magically enhanced astronomical telescope, Sirius was surrounded by an impossibly thin halo of light, pulsing faintly, almost like a slow breath. It was something no Muggle telescope could ever reveal. There was no proof, but the magical world believed it to be the star's magical radiance. "Well done, Mr. Rosier." Professor Sinistra drifted over. "Now record its position using the coordinate grid on your star chart. Pay attention to the ecliptic reference line." Once she moved on, Alex lowered his voice. "How are you so good at this? You look like you've done it 100 times." "We have a similar telescope at home," Regulus said. The Black family did, in fact, own an antique astronomical telescope, even if he'd never used it before. "So what's astronomy actually good for?" Alex muttered as he clumsily wrote down the coordinates. "Besides stars being pretty, it's useful in more ways than you think." Regulus kept his eye on Sirius, recalling passages from the family library. Many advanced potions depend on precise lunar phases and stellar positions. A lot of the key ingredients for Felix Felicis, for example, have to be harvested under specific moon phases and star alignments. Some variants of ancient runes change in strength depending on the position of certain constellations. He went on, and that's not even counting old magical contracts, family rituals, or castle ward systems. Their power rises and falls with stellar cycles. Understanding the sky is, in a way, learning to read the hidden clock of the magical world. Alex stared at him. "None of that's in the textbook." "Because it's material for later years," Regulus said evenly, "or part of certain family traditions." At that moment, Professor Sinistra clapped her hands to draw everyone's attention. "Now shift your telescope about 15 degrees to the left, and lower the elevation by 5 degrees. You should see 3 bright stars, nearly evenly spaced in a straight line. That's Orion's belt. Record their positions and relative angles." Regulus adjusted his telescope. When the 3 stars came into view, his hands stilled. It wasn't just their beauty. It was the pattern. 3 stars. Alatok, Alnilam, Mintaka. In Muggle astronomy, they were simply 3 unrelated stars hundreds of light-years away, appearing aligned only by chance. But through a magical telescope, Regulus saw something else. Despite the vast distances between them, their magical radiance was not entirely separate. Extremely fine threads of magic, thin as spider silk, flowed slowly between the 3 points, forming a fragile triangular structure. He quickly recorded their coordinates on the star chart, connecting the points with dotted lines and marking the angles. Orion's belt was almost a perfect straight line, but not quite. There was a curvature so slight it was negligible on a cosmic scale, yet potentially critical in magical application. Regulus could build precise geometric models of constellations in his mind. He could simulate stellar positions, even calculate trajectories. Just now, without meaning to, he had projected their relative positions 100 years into the future based on their current data and known proper motion. Stars moved. Slowly, but undeniably. Each of Orion's belt stars traveled through the galaxy along its own vector. Was that motion itself part of their magical nature? He made a decision on the spot. He would incorporate the true movement of constellations into his meditation, using exact calculations and spatial visualization. Professor Sinistra's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. I see many of you have finished recording. Remember, the value of astronomy isn't memorizing constellation names. It's understanding the eternal rhythms within the movement of the stars. Class dismissed. Eternal rhythms. The words echoed in Regulus's mind as he packed away his star chart. Deep into the night, the dormitory was silent. Regulus sat cross-legged inside his 4-poster bed, the curtains drawn, a soundproofing charm quietly in place. He closed his eyes and sank inward. Magic circulation and meditation began together. Inside his body, magic flowed like a gentle stream along familiar paths, nourishing every inch of flesh. This was physical tempering, the most basic foundation of all. At the same time, at the highest level of his awareness, he constructed a model of Orion's belt. Using remembered astronomical data, the subtle deviations he'd observed, calculated trajectories, and the star's own motion, he gave the 3 points an almost imperceptible but directional movement. A static framework, paired with a dynamic trend. Then he tried to align the rhythm of his internal magic circulation with the movement of those 3 points in his mind. At first, it didn't work. The flow of magic in his body was concrete and tangible, something he could feel. The motion of the stars was abstract, nearly motionless, as if it existed in another dimension entirely. But Regulus was patient. He focused all his attention on that dynamic model, sensing the tension of motion that was almost non-existent, yet undeniably real. Gradually, he made minute adjustments to the speed of his magic circulation, subtly altering its overall cadence. Slower, more solemn, and more constant. Time passed in silence. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Then, all at once, something clicked. Not that his magic traced constellation shapes through his body. It was deeper than that. The state of his internal circulation aligned with the essence of motion in the stellar model, reaching a level of harmony within his consciousness. In that instant, 2 completely different improvements occurred at once. The once gentle, nourishing flow of magic gained a heavier, denser quality. Where it passed, it didn't just restore. It reinforced. Muscles and bones seemed to be compacted and strengthened more efficiently under that synchronized resonance. A new sense of power rose slowly from deep within his limbs. At the same time, maintaining the dynamic model demanded extreme mental focus. Yet the moment it truly synchronized with stellar motion, his mind felt anchored, clearer and more stable. The everyday mental noise, the castle's constant magical whispers, even the faint sense of alienation and loneliness he carried as a reincarnator, were smoothed away by something vast and tranquil. His soul felt as if it had found a solid base, steady and unshakable. This was a qualitative leap. Regulus remained in that state, carefully observing every subtle change. Under synchronization, not only did his magic recover faster, the magic itself felt more condensed and obedient. He realized he might have brushed against a deeper magical truth. Body, mind, and magic had never been 3 separate elements. They could be unified, reinforcing one another, rising together. He named this integrated method in his mind, star-guided meditation. From now on, physical tempering and mental cultivation no longer needed to be separate practices. They became a single, complete discipline, one that sought harmony within the self. Thus, the foundation was laid. Chapter 27, The Slytherin Welcome. On the last day of September, just as dinner ended, the 2 7th-year Slytherin prefects, Lucretius Burke and Narcissa Black, rose at the end of the long table and lightly tapped a silver spoon against a goblet. All Slytherin students are to return to the common room immediately after dinner, Narcissa said, standing with effortless grace. First years, attendance is mandatory. The moment her words settled, the mood at the Slytherin table shifted. Upperclassmen exchanged knowing looks. A few fifth-year boys even wore expressions that promised entertainment. Students from pure-blood families, especially those from the core lines of old houses, showed the same reaction. A quiet sense of anticipation. Finally, Cuthbert set down his cutlery at once, dabbing his mouth with a napkin, excitement flashing in his eyes. Hermes slowly lifted his head, his dark gaze sweeping over the prefects before settling on Regulus beside him. Only Alex, from a mild-mannered pure-blood branch family, blinked in confusion. He leaned closer and whispered, "What's going on? Why do we have to go back?" Cuthbert snorted, not bothering to hide the superiority in his tone, mixed with a trace of pity. "Rosier, didn't your family tell you?" "Well, I guess that figures. It's tradition. Slytherin's welcome. We see which of the new snakes has the sharpest fangs." Alex's face drained of color. Understanding dawned. He glanced at Regulus, then at the other first years, unease written all over him. The rest of the Great Hall caught on quickly. Whispers spread as older students explained Slytherin's customs to the younger ones. Regulus felt more than one glance from the staff table. The one that lingered was Dumbledore's. From the Gryffindor side came other looks as well. Regulus didn't respond to any of them. He simply stood and followed the flow. By the time they filed into the underground common room, the atmosphere had changed completely. Green flames leapt in the fireplace, reflecting off dark green drapes and silver decor, and off dozens of faces wearing very different expressions. Upperclassmen clustered around sofas and armchairs, talking in low voices, their eyes roaming over the 10 first years who had just arrived. The first years instinctively drew closer together, then subtly split into small groups. Cuthbert, Hermes, and the rest of the pure-blood corps stood together, expressions ranging from arrogant to brooding. The others, including 2 half-blood students, a boy and a girl, looked isolated and out of place. Their eyes darted around the room, unsettled, before landing on Regulus almost in unison. Over the past month, Regulus had stood apart from other high-status pure-blood students. He never flaunted arrogance, never joined in petty talk about bloodlines. In class and group work, he was precise and fair. To those outside the pure-blood inner circle, or from ordinary backgrounds, the second son of the Black family was almost the only Slytherin first year who felt reasonable and dependable. Without realizing it, they edged a little closer to where Regulus stood. Regulus noticed the quiet reliance, but made no comment. He moved to the edge of the open space in the center of the room and stood there, calm, grey eyes sweeping over everyone. Quiet. Lucretius Burke stepped in front of the fireplace, his voice low and serious. The common room fell silent at once. "The usual rules," he said succinctly. "First years will duel in pairs. Any spell is allowed, as long as you can cast it and it doesn't send Madame Pomfrey looking for us. The goal is to know yourself, and to know others. Slytherin respects power, and it respects the wisdom to control it." Before he finished, murmurs and snickers had already spread among the upperclassmen. "Place your bets, place your bets." A 6th-year boy laughed, pulling out a small notebook. "Who's the last rookie standing this year? Odds are open. I'm putting 10 galleons on the black kid." "That's hardly a gamble," the girl beside him scoffed. "Just look at him. Does he look 11 to you? I say he drops everyone in under 3 minutes." "Not necessarily," a bespectacled 7th-year said, pushing his glasses up and pretending to analyze things. "That Mulciber boy looks dangerous. I've heard his family keeps some unusual collections. And the Avery kid isn't completely useless either." "Oh, come on." The first boy nodded toward Regulus. "Look at how he's standing. Everyone else is either shaking, overexcited, or putting on a tough face like Avery. And him? He looks like he's waiting in his own study for someone to bring tea. I'll raise the bet. He won't even wrinkle his robes." The chatter drifted clearly into the ears of the first years. Cuthbert's face flushed, half with excitement, half with anger. Alex grew even more tense, fingers twisting the edge of his robe. The 2 half-blood students looked pale. Hermes remained dark and silent, his gaze on Regulus sharpening. And at the center of it all, Regulus himself stood without expression. Now, draw lots for the first round, Narcissa said, producing a small silver cup filled with parchment slips. The results came quickly. Alex was paired with another nervous pure-blood boy from a side branch. A half-blood girl drew Cuthbert and went even paler. Regulus drew another pure-blood boy, who looked close to tears when he saw the name. Wait! A low voice cut through the room. Hermes stepped forward, looking first at the prefects, then at Regulus. I request to duel Regulus Black. The common room went still, then erupted into louder murmurs. Changing opponents wasn't common, but the rules didn't forbid it, as long as both parties agreed. Lucretius raised a brow and looked to Regulus. Black. Every eye turned toward him. Regulus met Hermes's gaze. There was no provocation in those dark eyes. Only a kind of obsessive focus, something tightly restrained. He thought of the scorch scent in the dormitory. The dark red book with no title. All right, Regulus said calmly. Then he added, since these are one-on-one matches in sequence, we can go last and let everyone else finish first. The boy who'd been replaced looked as if he'd been granted a reprieve from execution and hurried aside. The other first years didn't object. It was obvious to everyone that a match between Regulus and Hermes would be on a different level. The prefects exchanged a glance and nodded. Very well. We'll begin with the other pairs. The duel started quickly. The open space was cleared, students crowding around to watch. Alex and his opponent floundered through their match, nerves making their incantations stumble and their disarming charms fly crooked. Alex ultimately lost after tripping over his own feet in a moment of panic, drawing a round of laughter. Cuthbert's match against the half-blood girl was far easier. A clean obstacle spell knocked her off balance, followed by a precise disarming charm that ended it. Several upperclassmen nodded in approval. The remaining matches followed a similar pattern. As Regulus had already noted, first years, even those carefully trained by pure-blood families, were still raw at this age. Their magic was immature, control weak, practical experience nearly non-existent. The contents of Standard Book of Spells already demanded real effort from them. Disarming charms, obstacle spells, leg lockers, binding charms, petrification, fire spells. Being able to cast these basics smoothly and land them accurately was considered good among peers. For Regulus, there was no difficulty at all. Any spell that required precise movement, clear pronunciation, and basic magical guidance was almost effortless for him. One look, a bit of practice, and it was his. His control and computational precision more than compensated for his age, letting even simple spells display a stability and force far beyond what most first years could manage. Of course, magic wasn't that simple. Spells driven by intense emotion, complex conceptual understanding, or rare talents and catalysts were still areas he needed to study. After several rounds, the first years were exhausted. Some were exhilarated, some discouraged. In the end, only two remained standing in the center of the room. Regulus Black and Hermes Mulciber. Chapter 28, First Year Chief. They stood 10 feet apart and gave slight bows. Begin, Narcissa announced. Hermes moved the instant the word left her mouth, his wand snapping forward. Rictus Empra. A streak of silver shot toward Regulus. Opening with the tickling charm wasn't lethal, but it was abrupt. Regulus didn't move his feet. He flicked his wand once, casually. Another silver flash met Hermes's spell midair with pinpoint accuracy, bursting into a scatter of glittering sparks. Locomotor Mortis. Hermes followed up at once, blue light skimming low across the floor. Regulus tapped his wand to the ground. An unseen barrier rose before him, and the leg locker hit it like a spell, striking a slanted plane, sliding off and dissipating against the wall. Impedimenta. Hermes fired a third curse, quick and subtle. Impedimenta. Regulus answered with the same incantation. The two spells collided in the center of the space with a dull, pounding thud. Regulus's jinx was stronger. It crushed Hermes's spell outright and kept going. Hermes had to roll across the floor to avoid it, scrambling up in clear disarray. Nearby first years widened their eyes, hands flying to their mouths. Upperclassmen nodded, impressed. Anyone could see it. Regulus's spell power was absurd. Still, he didn't press the attack. He calmly blocked or redirected every spell Hermes threw at him. Binding charms were flicked aside. Some curses missed him by inches as he shifted just enough to let them pass. Throughout it all, Regulus never left the small patch of floor where he'd started. Every spell he used came straight from standard book of spells, basic defensive and interference magic, each cast with effortless precision. His expression never changed. It didn't look like a duel so much as a demonstration. Hermes, on the other hand, sped up. His casting grew sharper, trickier, far beyond what most first years could manage. His family had clearly taught him in advance. Yet his face darkened by the second, breath turning ragged. He wasn't stupid. He could see it. Regulus wasn't even trying. That calm, measured response was humiliating. Is that all you can do, Black? Hermes snarled, anger flashing in his eyes. Just dodge. He broke off the rapid exchanges and raised his wand high. His chant dropped lower, harsher, the syllables twisted and difficult. An ominous dark red glow gathered at the tip, the air around it turning cold. Several upperclassmen frowned. Lucretius Burke stepped forward, ready to intervene. Narcissa's brow tightened, fingers already closing around her wand. Too late. Hermes hissed the final syllables. A beam of dark red, nearly black, heavy with pain and malice, tore across the room toward Regulus. Dark magic. It was clearly incomplete, its power greatly weakened, but the nature of it was unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the common room. For the first time, Regulus's calm gaze shifted. So this was it. Hermes was skilled in dark magic. Regulus could feel it clearly. This wasn't the first time Hermes had used that spell on a living person. Family tradition. Regulus abandoned the basic spells. He pointed his wand forward. No gesture. No incantation. The motion was stripped to its bare minimum. A solid silver barrier snapped into place in front of him, crystalline as cut glass, its surface alive with intricate, orderly ripples that flowed without breaking. The dark red beam slammed into it. A teeth-aching hiss tore through the air, like metal being eaten alive. Red light raked across the silver shield, clawing and gnawing at its surface, unable to punch through. The standoff lasted barely 2 seconds. Hermes's face went pale, disbelief flooding his eyes as the beam sputtered and vanished. The silver barrier remained, flawless. In the same instant the dark light died, Regulus stepped forward. A pinpoint of red flared at his wand tip. Expelliarmus. The spell was denser and faster than anything Hermes had cast, a bolt of red tearing through the air and striking him square in the chest. Crack! Hermes's wand flew upward, spinning in an arc, caught cleanly by Regulus's free hand. The duel was over. It was mercy, in its own way. Otherwise, a single leg locker would have been enough to drop Hermes to his knees. From the moment Hermes cast dark magic to the instant Regulus broke it and disarmed him, less than 5 seconds passed. Many students hadn't even finished reacting to the appearance of dark magic. The common room fell into dead silence. Hermes stood frozen, his right hand still clenched as if holding his wand. His body trembled. His face was bloodless, his eyes empty, unable to accept that his most secret, most trusted weapon had been dismantled so easily. Regulus stepped forward and returned the wand. His voice stayed even, without triumph or disdain. Just calm. Good attempt. But the spell structure is unstable, and your magic supply falters. Next time you use it, you should be thinking about killing me, not hesitating. The air seemed to freeze. The word killing, spoken so evenly by an 11-year-old, sent a chill through the room. Upperclassmen reacted first. Lucretius's eyebrows shot up, open appreciation and even delight flashing in his eyes. Nearby, several 5th and 6th year pureblood students traded looks, murmuring under their breath. Did you hear that? Thinking about killing me? Merlin. From a first year. Elegant. Powerful. And a 7th year girl from the Caro family licked her lips, eyes bright. No moral panic over dark magic. He knows exactly what it is. That's how a Slytherin should be. The Black family might really produce someone dangerous this time, a boy from the Knot family said, his tone cautious. To them, Regulus had judged dark magic as a technique, critiqued its execution, and ignored its inherent evil. That mindset aligned far more closely with certain ancient pureblood values than Hermes's half-formed curse ever could. Alex parted his lips, his gaze flicking from Hermes, pale and hollow-eyed, to Regulus, calm as ever. He wanted to say something. It was just a match. This had gone too far. Words like killing did not belong here. Neither did spells that felt this dark. Nothing came out. The words never came. When Regulus's calm gaze swept past him, every naive thought froze in place. Alex dropped his head, staring at the tips of his shoes. Cuthbert felt something else entirely. After the conflict in flying class, he'd thought the gap between himself and Regulus might be bridged with technique and cleverness. Now he understood. The difference was visible, undeniable. He clenched his fists, then slowly let them go, watching in silence. As for Hermes himself, the emptiness in his eyes snapped into focus. He stared at Regulus, humiliation, shock, fear, and a trace of panic churning together. He had hesitated. He hadn't dared, couldn't dare, to cast that spell at full strength in front of everyone. He yanked his wand back, dropped his head, and slipped into the shadows at the edge of the crowd, locking every emotion behind his familiar brooding mask. Ahem. Narcissa cleared her throat, breaking the tension. She and Lucretius exchanged a look. Tonight's welcome had achieved its purpose. There was no need to continue. No suspense left to wring from it. Lucretius stepped forward, scanning the remaining first years. Does anyone wish to challenge Black, or Mulciber? His gaze moved slowly across them. Alex kept his head down. The others shook their heads, avoiding his eyes. Even Cuthbert, who might once have harbored a thought or two, stood in silence. In that case, Lucretius said evenly, the position of first-year chief goes to Regulus Black. Let this be the standard you aim for. Chapter 29, A Letter from Bella. The noise from the Slytherin welcome hadn't fully died down yet. Students were breaking into small groups, voices low as they rehashed the brief but explosive duel. Regulus had just stepped away from the cleared space in the center of the common room, intending to head back to the dormitory, when someone called his name. Regulus. It was Narcissa Black. She stood near the archway leading to the girls' dormitories, alone for once, without the usual cluster of older girls around her. She was clearly waiting for him. A few upper-year boys who had been about to approach the newly crowned chief took the hint and stopped short. Cousin Narcissa. Regulus turned and walked over. He wasn't surprised she wanted to speak with him, only that she'd chosen to do it so soon. Narcissa didn't answer. She simply gestured for him to follow. They left the common room and entered a narrow stone corridor. There were no portraits here, only cold walls and greenish torches burning at regular intervals. Once she was sure they were alone, Narcissa turned. Worry and severity were written plainly across her face. She drew a black sealed envelope from her sleeve. The wax bore a snarling skull with a snake clamped between its teeth. A symbol not yet public, but already quietly recognized in certain circles. Bella sent this for you. Narcissa lowered her voice. She specifically told me to wait until you'd secured the chief position before giving it to you. Regulus took the letter. The black envelope felt faintly cool, with a trace of unsettling magical residue clinging to it. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked at Narcissa. She seemed to understand the unspoken question and sighed softly. The situation outside is tightening, Regulus. That man, his influence is spreading fast. It's no longer secret meetings and small-scale trouble. The Ministry of Magic. The Wisengamot. Even the Hogwarts Board. There are people backing him, or people afraid of him. Some shops in Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade have quietly changed hands. A few editors from dissenting papers have stepped down for health reasons. And 2 officials from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement who publicly questioned the abuse of the Statute of Secrecy were found last month, injured by so-called experimental magic gone wrong, and sent to St. Mungo's. She looked straight at Regulus. He's persuasive and dangerous. Promises, threats, and power, openly displayed. He's weaving a net. Among the pure-blood families, the Lestranges are already at the core. The Knotts, the Carrows, the Yaxleys have chosen sides. Many others are waiting, weighing their options. The Malfoys. She drew a steadying breath. The Malfoys as well. Regulus understood. Narcissa herself might not fully agree with Voldemort's vision of conquest and cleansing, but she was about to marry into the Malfoy family. Her position would be bound to Lucius Malfoy's choice, and to the family's interests. She had no room to maneuver. It matched what Regulus remembered of history, only sharper, more detailed. The shape of Voldemort's first rise was becoming disturbingly clear. Thank you for telling me, Regulus said calmly, slipping the letter into an inner pocket of his robes. Narcissa studied his face, as if searching for even a flicker of fear or uncertainty. She found none. In the end, she only said quietly, "Be careful of Bella. She isn't the same anymore. And be careful of what's written in that letter. You're young, but that won't protect you forever." With that, she gave a slight nod and turned away, her robes whispering against the stone as she left the corridor. Back in the dormitory, Cuthbert, Hermes, and Alex hadn't returned yet. Regulus drew his bed curtains and cast a soundproofing charm before taking out the letter. He broke the seal. A faint scent drifted out, expensive perfume layered over something sharper, burned, almost acrid. The parchment was thick. The handwriting was wild and forceful, the strokes pressing so hard they nearly tore through the page, betraying the writer's agitation. "My dearest cousin Regulus. I was delighted to hear that you've already distinguished yourself at Hogwarts, claiming the position of Slytherin chief. It fills me with pride. The noble blood of the Black family runs strong in you. You have not disappointed me, the family, or our lord. This is a magnificent era, Regulus. The old order is crumbling. The rotten Ministry of Magic is controlled by cowards and mudblood sympathizers who defile our birthright and our glory. But dawn is coming. A true king has risen. He will lead us to cleanse this tainted world and rebuild an eternal order belonging to pure-blood wizards alone. That is what we deserve. You have shown talent, but it is far from enough. You must grow faster, become stronger and more resolute. Slytherin's little games are only the beginning. The real battlefield lies beyond the castle walls. Our lord requires loyal and capable followers. The Black family must claim the most brilliant place in this new era. Do not be misled by weak sentiment. Do not shackle yourself with false morality. Power is truth, and truth belongs only to the victor. I have already reported your situation to our lord. He is very interested in you. A Black who displays such ability at so young an age has caught his attention. Remember this interest, Regulus. It is a supreme honor, and it should drive you forward. Do not fail it. Be ready at all times, cousin. When the summons comes, prove yourself worthy of the Black name, worthy of serving a greater cause. Your loyal and eager cousin, Bellatrix Lestrange." The letter ended. Regulus rested the parchment on his knees, his face unreadable. The fervor, obsession, and hunger for violent power spilling from Bella's words were even stronger than he'd expected. This wasn't simple loyalty. It was devotion twisted into something pathological. The pressure was obvious too. Bella, or rather Voldemort behind her, had no intention of overlooking him just because he was 11. Especially that line about Voldemort taking an interest in him. That wasn't a good sign. Attention like that usually meant scrutiny, trials, and punishment if expectations weren't met. He'd thought he had at least a few years to build strength and find his own path. Now it seemed time was tighter than he'd imagined. Voldemort's net was closing, and the Black family was already caught inside it. A cold irritation crept into his normally steady thoughts. When Regulus stepped back into the common room, plenty of students were still around. He spotted Alger Traverse at once, the 5th year he'd humiliated at the start of term, surrounded by a few pure-blood followers. They had claimed the area near the fireplace, speaking just loudly enough, their eyes flicking now and then toward the dormitory corridor. When Regulus appeared, Traverse raised his voice deliberately. "So really, no matter how talented you are, you're still a baby who needs watching. First-year chief, what does that even mean? A real Slytherin thinks long-term. Real influence. Not a bit of cleverness and luck, getting praised twice and suddenly believing you matter." His cronies chuckled along. Several upperclassmen who hadn't left yet, including some neutrals, turned to watch, interest lighting their faces. They knew about the earlier conflict between Traverse and Regulus. They also knew exactly what Traverse was doing, trying to knock the shine off the new chief at the height of his momentum. It was a familiar scene in Slytherin. Cuthbert and Alex were sitting in the sofa area nearby. Cuthbert frowned, eyes moving from Traverse to Regulus. Alex looked openly uneasy. Even Hermes, who had been lurking in a corner, shifted and drifted closer, stopping about 5 meters away, watching in silence. "Traverse," a 6th-year girl said, the same one who had praised Regulus earlier. "That's enough. He's only a first year." "First year." Alger Traverse scoffed and finally turned fully toward Regulus, malice and confidence plain on his face. "A first year who uses who knows what underhanded tricks on older students? A first year who makes certain people lose their heads and circle him like moths? I'm just stating facts. If you're young, Learn restraint. Learn to respect your seniors. Don't let a bit of talent go to your head. Do you really think being Slytherin chief is some grand achievement? Chapter 30, An Overwhelming Victory. Traverse's words grew sharper by the second. He twisted the facts on purpose, reducing Regulus's strength to cheap tricks and luck. Regulus lowered his head slightly, calm and composed. He knew exactly what Traverse was doing. He was trying to provoke him, push him into losing control and striking first. If Regulus attacked first, Traverse, a fifth year forced to defend himself, would hold the moral high ground no matter how the duel ended. And Traverse was confident. As long as he stayed focused and didn't make careless mistakes, he would never embarrass himself the way he had last time. The surrounding chatter gradually faded. Everyone was watching Regulus, waiting for his response. Regulus stood where he was, listening to those malicious words, feeling the cold irritation carried by the letter in his chest slowly ferment and heat up. He looked at Alger Traverse's face, full of calculation and spite, and suddenly found it ridiculous and tiresome. Why were there always people who couldn't see reality for what it was? The corner of his mouth slowly lifted, forming a smile so cold it was nearly sharp. Those who knew him well froze when they saw it. Cuthbert and Alex exchanged uneasy glances. Both of them sensed it at once. Something about Regulus's mood was off. Even Hermes, lurking in the shadows, had his gaze stall for a brief moment. In the corner, Snape watched closely, eyes narrowed as he studied the Regulus who looked like an entirely different person. Regulus did not explode in anger or snap back the way Traverse expected. He did not even spare a glance for the upper years waiting eagerly for a show. He simply took 2 steps forward and spoke in a flat, icy voice. "Save your clumsy provocation, Traverse. You want me to attack first so you can claim forced self-defense and claw back that pitiful excuse for pride. Such a childish trick, and you're still acting it out with such enthusiasm." As he watched Traverse's expression sour instantly, Regulus continued in that unsettlingly calm tone. "Like a clown." 3 light words, yet they landed like 3 hard slaps across Alger Traverse's face. Then Regulus raised the wand in his hand. "So stop wasting time. Draw your wand." The common room fell into dead silence, broken only by the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Traverse's face flushed and drained in turns. The humiliation of having his scheme exposed in public tangled with the fury of being called a clown. He had never imagined Regulus would ignore the usual rules entirely and rip his calculations open in the most brutal way possible. "Fine." Traverse yanked out his wand, pointing it straight at Regulus, forcing a vicious look onto his face. "If you're this arrogant, I'll teach you where the gap between a first year and a fifth year really lies. I'll also teach you how to respect your senior." The crowd automatically spread outward, clearing the space once more. Whispered voices surged like a tide. "Tisk, Traverse really is an idiot. He still thinks everyone else is one too. The black kid's ruthless. He tore the mask right off. Fifth year versus first year. Even if Black beat Traverse last time, wasn't that basically a sneak attack? Maybe not. Did you see how he blocked that dark spell? That's different. Mulciber was a first year too. Traverse has had 5 proper years of training. This should be good." Cuthbert clenched his fists tightly. Alex had already squeezed his eyes shut. Hermes leaned against a stone pillar not far away, his dark gaze locked on the center of the room. Lucretius made no move to intervene. In Slytherin, a private, mutual duel like this was often tolerated as long as it didn't spiral into something irreversible. "Start!" a thrill-seeking upper year shouted. Alger Traverse rushed the attack, lessons from last time firmly in mind, wand already in hand. Stupefy! A blazing red bolt shot straight at Regulus's face. Regulus flicked his wand lightly. Light flashed, and the stunning spell was intercepted right in front of him. Incendio! Traverse switched spells, a blazing serpent of fire roaring from his wand. Regulus did not move. His wand tipped upward with a casual motion, followed by a fire-extinguishing charm. The flames vanished into nothing, taking even the lingering heat with them. Regulus's cool voice carried over. "Is that all?" He did not give Traverse another chance to cast. Regulus snapped his wand, and the leg-locker curse struck with pinpoint accuracy. Traverse's body went slack. As he pitched forward, an impedimenta slammed into his torso. Bang! The 2 spells hit in rapid succession. Traverse was flipped stiffly in midair, and before he could hit the ground, another impedimenta followed immediately. Bang! He flew like a torn sack of cloth, battered helplessly through the air. The brief combo made several upper years wince. Just watching it looked painful. Hiss! A sixth-year girl sucked in a breath, hugging her shoulders. That has to hurt. Another boy nodded. Compared to the pain, Traverse probably feels worse inside. A fourth-year exclaimed, look at Black's spells. Silent, fast, the transitions are perfect. Several others exchanged looks. Could you dodge that? What about you? No chance. After taking 3 spells in a row, Traverse's mind was blank as he flew backward. He didn't even register what had happened before he hit the ground. But it hurts everywhere. He flew 7 or 8 meters. Instead of the expected impact, he sank straight into a mire of sludge. Reducto. In a panic, Traverse fired the curse at the ground beneath him, trying to blast his way free. Before the spell could finish its work, an empty armchair beside him suddenly came alive. Its wooden frame twisted, stretched, and reshaped itself. In moments, it became a massive python nearly 10 meters long. The serpent slid forward without a sound, coiling around Traverse's waist and yanking him out of the sludge before tightening its grip. Ah! Traverse screamed in terror, his wand flailing. Diffindo! The spell struck the snake, blasting away a few scales. Beneath them, flesh was clearly visible. That was all it did. The coils tightened instead, squeezing the air from his lungs. Let go! Let go of me! Traverse struggled uselessly, his face turning red. Regulus walked closer at an unhurried pace. He looked down at the wretched figure bound tightly by the python, his expression utterly unmoved. With an almost leisurely flick of his wand, he gave another command. The python began to move, dragging Traverse, who struggled in vain, in slow circles across the open space of the common room. One circle. Then another. Like a grotesque display of a captured trophy. That's enough. Let him go. A sixth-year boy friendly with Traverse couldn't stand it any longer and shouted. Regulus glanced at him. That single look choked off the rest of the sentence in the boy's throat. Only when Traverse began rolling his eyes from lack of air and humiliation did Regulus seem to lose interest. Then he lifted his wand. The python released him instantly, collapsing back into a broken, fabric-shredded armchair. Alger Traverse crumpled to the floor like a fish hauled out of water, coughing and gasping violently. His robes were smeared with saliva, his face streaked with tears and snot, his wand nowhere to be seen. The common room was silent. Everyone stared at the black-haired boy who still looked neat and untouched, as if he had merely taken a casual walk. Using only basic spells in a single, precise, imaginative act of transfiguration, he had toyed with a 5th year from start to finish. The entire exchange had ended without his opponent ever brushing the edge of his robes. Some even wondered whether, if this hadn't been a crowded common room, Black would have killed Traverse outright. The way the python moved had made it painfully clear. Traverse had been seconds from suffocation. This was no longer about winning or losing. It was a display of skill and intent, edged with something cruel. Regulus did not spare the defeated boy another glance. He ignored the stunned, awed, and faintly fearful looks around him. The irritation in his chest seemed to ease slightly after this one-sided game, yet a deeper, colder urgency still settled heavily in his heart. He put away his wand and turned, walking straight toward the corridor leading to the dormitories through the heavy silence. Cuthbert opened his mouth, then closed it without a word. Alex stood there, completely stunned. Hermes cast one last unreadable look at Regulus's back, then glanced at the collapsed Traverse before melting quietly back into the shadows. After tonight, the name Regulus Black would likely carry a very different meaning in Slytherin. Chapter 31, Lighting the 4th Star. The dormitory was utterly silent. Regulus drew the heavy bed curtains and layered soundproofing and anti-surveillance charms, sealing off the outside world completely. Praise, whispers, wariness, scheming, even the lingering feverish warmth from Bella's letter were all shut out. He sat cross-legged on the bed, closed his eyes, and let his consciousness sink inward. Basic magic circulation flowed along familiar pathways, gently washing through his limbs and body, nourishing and strengthening every inch of muscle, sinew, and bone. Then, on a higher layer of awareness, his mental energy began to gather and weave itself together. In the dark sea of consciousness, the 3 stars of Orion's belt lit up one by one, moving with a slow, nearly imperceptible, yet undeniably real trajectory. Star-guided meditation began to turn. The chaos of stray thoughts was soothed by the vast imagery of the stars. Once his state of mind fully settled, Regulus attempted to light the fourth star. Things were moving faster than expected. His pace needed to quicken as well. Synchronizing 3 stars was only the beginning. It was merely the threshold of star-guided meditation. He directed his awareness toward Betelgeuse, glowing with a dark red halo. This required maintaining the dynamic model of the 3 belt stars while integrating this new point into the entire moving system. Betelgeuse had its own trajectory. Its relative position and motion in relation to the belt stars formed the foundation of Orion's upper body structure. The difficulty spiked sharply. Simulating stellar motion was far harder than constructing a static model, not by a small margin, but by orders of magnitude. It demanded precise calculation, powerful spatial imagination, and absolute control over magic. He had to maintain the exact relative positions of all points in his mind. At the same time, each point needed to move slowly, so slowly it was almost invisible to perception, yet in a way that still obeyed the laws of celestial motion. It was like controlling multiple points of light at once, each following a different, complex function, while ensuring the overall shape they formed remained intact. This required extreme concentration and non-stop calculation. The slightest lapse would cause one point's motion to slip, breaking the entire model's dynamic balance and potentially collapsing it outright. That slowness did not reduce the difficulty. Instead, because it had to exist continuously and be maintained over time, it imposed an even heavier mental burden. Simulating this near-still, ultra-slow movement required absolute patience, precision, and constant adjustment. Regulus began by precisely locating Betelgeuse's current position in his awareness. A new point of light ignited, dark red and slightly larger than the belt stars, appearing above and to the right of them. Next came motion. Betelgeuse's self-motion data differed from that of the belt stars. Even its direction varied slightly. Regulus had to split off part of his focus to calculate and sustain Betelgeuse's movement while also coordinating its dynamic geometric relationship with the belt stars. Distance, angle, and direction all shifted slowly as each star followed its own path. The moment he added Betelgeuse's motion, the previously stable 3-star model was disturbed. The trajectories of the 3 points grew chaotic, and the entire structure teetered on the brink of collapse. He stopped immediately, reverting to maintaining only the 3 stars. After stabilizing them again, he made another careful attempt. This time, he first added Betelgeuse as a static point, locking in its relative position with the 3 stars. Then, with extreme care, he began to inject the pre-calculated motion into it, bit by tiny bit, while simultaneously making subtle adjustments to the belt star's motion to accommodate this new variable and seek a fresh dynamic balance. It was an exhausting process, both mentally and computationally. His mind felt like a bowstring pulled taut. A faint, persistent pressure throbbed at his temples. Maintaining a 4-star dynamic model consumed far more mental energy than 3. The drain rose almost exponentially. Time passed in silent resistance and constant adjustment. At some point, it felt as though an invisible gear finally clicked into place. Betelgeuse's dark red glow was no longer a jarring addition. Its motion fell into harmony with the belt stars. The simple quadrilateral formed by the 4 stars began to move together in the void of his consciousness, synchronized in a unified, harmonious rhythm. He succeeded. The 4-star dynamic model was complete, at least in its initial form. Regulus maintained the state, carefully sensing the changes. The mental cost was immense, but alongside it came a deeper sense of tranquility and a faint fullness, as though his soul itself had been stretched wider. After lighting the 4th star, the entire meditation state felt more layered and stable. His perception of the ambient magic in his surroundings also seemed just a bit sharper. He slowly withdrew from deep meditation and glanced at the magical timepiece by his bed. From his first attempt to light the 4th star to achieving a stable result, nearly 2 hours had passed. And that was only the time required to add a single star, building on an already mastered 3-star dynamic model. It was easy to foresee what lay ahead. As the model incorporated more stars, the dynamic relationships between them would grow increasingly complex. Each additional star would demand exponentially more time, calculation, and mental strain to integrate into the overall system. At the same time, it was equally clear that as the depth of meditation increased, his mind would be tempered by sustained high-intensity training. It would grow tougher and more vigorous, while his computational ability and spatial imagination steadily improved. In turn, this would gradually accelerate the process of lighting future stars. It was a spiraling ascent, slow and arduous at the start, faster later once the foundation was firmly laid. Yet the greatest challenge was not lighting more stars. It was fixation. Dynamics were the core of this method and also its greatest difficulty. Each meditation required him to recalculate, rebuild, and maintain the entire dynamic model. It could not be solidified into instinctive magical pathways the way fixed meditation diagrams could. To reach a state where this moving star model persisted naturally, whether walking, sitting, or lying down, was unimaginably difficult. Fixation usually meant immobility, yet what he sought to fix was a system in perpetual motion. This demanded that the deepest layers of his mind form an active structure capable of automatically processing complex dynamic changes and making continuous micro-adjustments on its own. The road ahead was long, but the light was already visible. Regulus closed his eyes again, choosing not to challenge the fifth star. Tonight's success with 4 stars was already a breakthrough. He needed consolidation, to make this 4-star dynamic model more stable, more natural. News that Regulus had utterly crushed fifth-year Alger Traverse spread suddenly and shocked everyone, exploding through Slytherin and even the wider pure-blood circles of Hogwarts. Slytherin revered power, and it also revered the intelligence to wield it. When the two combined and were displayed in such dramatic fashion, the impact was immense. Overnight, Regulus's standing within Slytherin underwent a subtle yet fundamental shift. Upper years no longer looked at him with the casual appraisal reserved for a promising junior. There was now genuine attention, and even a hint of wariness. No one said anything foolish anymore. Pure-blood students who had kept their distance from the Black family due to factional politics or the serious incident began reassessing the young heir. The Black family might really be on the rise this time, a 7th year murmured to a companion over breakfast. Think about the strength he showed, and how unfazed he was by dark magic. That kind of attitude appeals to certain people. What matters is power, his companion replied seriously. He's only a first year, and he toyed with a 5th year like a plaything. What about when he graduates? Lord Voldemort is at his peak right now. If the Black family produces someone like this, their future standing. Similar conversations unfolded in many corners. Pragmatism was one of Slytherin's survival rules. When the balance of power tilted clearly in one direction, adjusting one's stance and reassessing relationships was only natural. Over the following days, the Owl Post grew unusually busy. Many Slytherin students, especially upper years closely tied to their families, wrote home in detail about the duel and the overwhelming strength Regulus Black had displayed far beyond his age. Thursday morning, just after Transfiguration class ended, Regulus was stopped by a 7th year. Black, Professor Slughorn would like to see you in his office, the older student said politely. Regulus nodded, packed his things, and headed toward the potions classroom. Chapter 32, Slughorn. Horace Slughorn's office was much like the man himself, carefully curated to project comfort and abundance. The air carried a peculiar blend of expensive potion ingredients. The walls were crowded with photographs of Slughorn alongside famous witches and wizards. Ah! Regulus, my dear boy, do come in. Slughorn bustled forward, his round belly leading the way, his face split by a beaming smile. Sit, sit. A glass of mead? Or perhaps a sherbet lemon? Thank you, Professor, but I'm fine, Regulus replied politely. He took the indicated seat, posture straight and composed, neither stiff nor overly deferential. As he sat there, Regulus observed Slughorn carefully. The man was shrewd, fond of collecting promising students and weaving them into a vast web of favors and mutual benefit. He valued talent, background, and future utility. He also knew how to read the wines and avoid unnecessary risks. A textbook Slytherin opportunist, but not a villain. He simply took investment and networking to their extreme. I've heard about the little incident in the common room last night, Slughorn said, rubbing his hands together. His eyes seemed to glint. That Traverse boy, well, always so impulsive, not nearly mature enough. Still, you handled it very well. Very properly. Quite in line with the dignity of the Black family. Regulus almost laughed inside, along with a flicker of disbelief. I beat him half to death and you call that proper? And what exactly was the dignity of the Black family supposed to be? Bullying people? Outwardly, he remained calm, listening quietly and nodding in acknowledgement of the praise. With your talent and temperament, I have no doubt you'll become a truly influential figure in the wizarding world, Slughorn said, lowering his voice as he leaned forward, adopting a confidential air. I've always enjoyed watching outstanding young people shine. If you ever need help with potions, or anything else at all, my club, my collection, even a few of my modest connections, will always be open to you. Regulus understood perfectly. Slughorn was carefully avoiding Voldemort's name, but he was clearly optimistic about Regulus's prospects in the coming era and willing to invest early. Regulus showed a touch of age-appropriate humility. Thank you very much for your confidence, Professor. Actually, there is a rather obscure direction in potions that I've been curious about. I was hoping for your guidance. Oh. Slughorn's eyes brightened further. Do tell. I came across some descriptions in a few very old family fragments concerning ritual practices, Regulus said, choosing his words with care, sounding like a student driven by curiosity. The officiants would sometimes draw complex totems or runes directly onto the skin. Supposedly, this allowed brief contact with certain forces. I was wondering whether such external applications could be achieved through potions instead. For example, could potion ingredients with specific effects be processed into a form that can safely adhere to the skin and release its effect slowly over time? Slughorn stroked his double chin, clearly intrigued. An interesting idea. Very old, very niche. Directly inscribing magical runes is extremely dangerous, but using potions as a medium. There are records. Ancient northern witches used ointments brewed from dragon blood, powdered troll heart, and frost crystal flowers to gain strength, though the side effects were severe. If you want something safe, long-lasting, and targeted, that would involve ingredient stability, skin permeability, controlled magical release, and also preventing magical conflict and backlash. It's quite a complex topic, my boy. The more he spoke, the more animated he became, obviously drawn in by the academic challenge. Still, it's not impossible. I recall an appendix in alchemy book that mentioned a basic carrier formula, which might serve as a starting point. And some healers in Africa, particularly around Uagadou, have traditions of mixing plant extracts with mineral powders to draw sigils that enhance magical resistance. I'll need to check the texts and run some theoretical models. He looked at Regulus with open enthusiasm. If you're truly interested in this path, perhaps during the holidays we could conduct some safe, theoretical discussions and basic formula experiments. With absolute caution, of course. That's exactly what I was hoping for, Professor, Regulus said, inclining his head slightly. Thank you very much for your guidance. As he left Slughorn's office, Regulus felt quietly energized. One of his ideas had just gained a crucial supporting plank. At lunch, two owls with very different airs landed almost simultaneously in front of him, dropping two letters of noticeably different thickness. The first was from Walburga, the handwriting bold and overflowing with emotion. My proud son. The news has already reached us. You defeated your challenger and upheld the honor and glory of the Black family. Well done. This is exactly how a Black heir should act. Let those doubters be silenced. The family is proud of you. Your father and I could not be prouder. Continue to display your strength so that all may see the Black family will take a leading position in the great transformation to come. We are fully prepared to answer our Lord's call and fight for the future of pure bloods. You will be our blade and our glory. Stay sharp, my Regulus. Remember your mission and your bloodline. The words brimmed with unrestrained fervor, pride, and devotion to Voldemort's cause. Regulus folded the letter calmly. The second was from Orion, the writing steady and restrained. Regulus. I have heard of your recent performance. Be mindful of restraint when displaying your abilities. Do not make enemies lightly. Slytherin relationships are complex. Power is the foundation, but adaptability and judgment are what allow one to endure. The situation outside is growing increasingly tense, and matters at home are complicated. Your mother is highly motivated at present. You should be clear in your own mind. Focus on your studies and on strengthening your abilities. Hogwarts is still relatively stable for now. Make good use of its resources. I have updated your access to the family library. You may now consult shelves 7 through 12. Knowledge brings not only power, but wisdom. 2 letters, 2 entirely different expectations. Regulus put them both away. He understood clearly enough. His father was warning him that a storm was coming, while his mother could hardly wait to throw herself into it. At the Gryffindor table, one section felt unusually subdued. Sirius jabbed at the mashed potatoes on his plate, his expression dark. Of course he had heard about Regulus. There was some shock, but not complete surprise. He had always known his brother was different. He simply hadn't expected it to be to this extent. What unsettled him was not jealousy over Regulus's achievement or strength, but something deeper. The more impressive Regulus became, the more perfectly he fit Slytherin and pureblood expectations. The more likely it was that he would catch that man's attention and be pulled into that dark vortex. The thought of Regulus someday wearing a Death Eater's black robes, standing behind that man, made Sirius's chest feel tight. Even though he had long prepared himself for that possibility. "Hey, Sirius, don't look like that," James said, clapping a hand hard on his friend's shoulder. He assumed Sirius was simply annoyed at a Slytherin little snake stealing the spotlight. So he beat a fifth-year idiot. That Traverse kid was useless anyway. Your brother just got lucky and used some shady tricks. Sirius shook his head, saying nothing. James took the silence as agreement. His eyes gleamed as he leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Don't worry, mate. I've had it out for him since the train. Always putting on an act. I wrote to my dad. He says that kind of spell freezing technique is rare, but it has to have weaknesses. Either it burns through magic like mad, or it fails against fast, continuous attacks. Remus, Peter, and I talked it over. We'll find a chance to give him a lesson. Do it for you." Sirius looked up sharply. "James, don't. Relax, we know what we're doing," James cut in confidently, winking. "We won't make things awkward for you. We'll catch him alone, hit fast, and make sure he remembers it." Remus frowned slightly, as if he wanted to speak. He glanced at James's excitement, then at Sirius's dark expression, and finally let out a quiet sigh instead. Peter nodded nervously, his small eyes darting about. Sirius watched James, brimming with enthusiasm. The words of protest rose to his lips, then fell away. He knew James meant well, and once James made up his mind, he was hard to dissuade. More importantly, somewhere deep down, Sirius felt a faint, unsettling curiosity. He wanted to see whether James and the others could really force Regulus to show even more of what he was capable of. Chapter 33, Poor Potter. Thursday afternoon, after History of Magic. Regulus walked alone down a quiet corridor leading toward the library, books tucked under his arm. Professor Binns's hypnotic droning still echoed faintly in his mind. Suddenly, 3 figures stepped out from around the corner ahead, blocking his path. James stood in the center, wearing that familiar, prank-laced grin that never quite reached his eyes. Remus lingered slightly behind him, brow faintly furrowed. Peter shrank at the back, eyes darting nervously. Well, look who it is," James drawled, deliberately stretching his words. "Slytherin's little chief. All by yourself? Where's your entourage?" Regulus stopped. His gaze passed calmly over the 3 of them, lingering on Lupin for a brief moment longer. The brown-haired boy stood stiffly, the tension in his posture subtle but unmistakable. He was not openly aggressive like James, nor did he cower like Peter. He looked more like an unwilling bystander. Or rather, like a container straining to hold something down. Regulus let his magical perception brush lightly over Lupin. Within him, he sensed a tightly restrained force, instinctive and restless. Something non-human, primal, steeped in blood and the chill of moonlight, held in check by force rather than harmony. A werewolf. An oddly absurd thought flickered through Regulus's mind. Why did it have to be a wolf? Why not a pig man, or a dog man, or even a sheep man? Perhaps on full moons he could just transform, root around in the forbidden forest, chase his tail, or graze quietly. That might even be entertaining. The thought passed as quickly as it came. He knew Lupin's secret now, but to him, a werewolf was just that. Not worth dwelling on. He had no intention of exposing it. Let them keep playing their little game called friendship. Sirius was not here. Regulus understood at once, finding it faintly amusing, and faintly irritating. "Potter," Regulus said evenly, no emotion in his voice. "If your intellect is as barren as your magic, I suggest you report to the hospital wing instead of wasting what little brain power you have left on this painfully unoriginal provocation." James's face flushed red. You what?" Regulus cut in, a trace of almost pitying mockery slipping through. "What do you think this is? Some sort of brave little game? Picking fights, proving who's stronger? Is your world really that small? Quidditch, pranks and stunts like this?" He looked at James, as though seeing past the furious teenager to the man he would one day become. A man who would charge just as directly at Voldemort and the Death Eaters. Courageous, perhaps, but crude. Idealistic to the point of recklessness. As if the entire world could be reduced to a simple rule. Good people hit bad people. That kind of optimism, raised in love and sunlight and never truly tempered by cruelty, could be breathtakingly naive. James snapped, yanking out his wand. Rictus Empra. Locomotor Mortis. 2 spells shot toward Regulus, one high, one low. They were clearly practiced, faster than what most younger students could manage. In Regulus's eyes, they were still painfully slow. He did not even move his feet. His wand traced a casual half-circle in front of him. Protego. A solid barrier snapped into place. Both spells struck it and burst into scattered sparks. The shield did not waver. What? James froze. In that heartbeat of hesitation, Regulus pointed his wand forward. Expelliarmus. James reacted quickly, true to his reputation as an athlete. He tried to roll aside. It did not matter. A thick, tightly condensed red beam slammed into his chest. Ah! James cried out as he was blasted backward. His wand flew from his hand, only to be caught midair by Regulus with a smooth levitation charm. Petrificus Totalis. The third spell followed almost seamlessly, striking Lupin in the shoulder just as he started to move. Lupin froze mid-step, body locked in place, shock flickering in his eyes. Peter had already panicked. Seeing both friends taken down in an instant, he shrieked and turned to run without even drawing his wand. Incarcerus. Regulus did not look at him. He flicked his wand casually, an invisible binding snapped into place in front of Peter, pinning him where he stood. All he could manage was a muffled whimper. The entire exchange took less than 10 seconds. The corridor fell silent, leaving only James clutching his chest and gasping, Lupin rigid as stone, and Peter struggling soundlessly. Regulus picked up James's wand and stepped closer, looking down at his twisted face, contorted by pain and disbelief. This is what your confidence rests on. He tossed the wand back into James's arms, his tone like that of an adult scolding a disobedient child. Go read a few more books, Potter. Or try watching the people around you. Ask yourself why you don't learn from those who are actually capable. He turned to leave. Footsteps sounded hurriedly from the far end of the corridor. Regulus paused, then lifted the spells on Lupin and Peter. Lupin staggered, bracing himself against the wall. Peter collapsed onto the floor, gulping air. James Potter. What have you done now? Lily Evans came running up, breathless, red hair flying, green eyes blazing with anger. She had rushed over to stop whatever trouble was brewing. But when she took in the scene, Regulus standing untouched and calm, and James's trio looking thoroughly wrecked with wands on the floor, she froze. Looks like you're a bit late, Miss Evans, Regulus said, inclining his head politely. His tone was neutral, not cold. He looked down at James again. His grey eyes were empty of emotion. This is the last time, Potter, he said quietly. I don't care about your childish games, and I have no interest in indulging your fragile pride. This is the second time you've come after me on your own initiative, and it will be the last. There will not be a third. James jerked his head up, fury burning in his eyes. He wanted to shout back, to curse him out. The pain in his chest, and the memory of being utterly crushed without the slightest chance to fight back, slammed shut his throat. He understood the warning. If he tried again, it would not end as lightly as this. Regulus said nothing more. He turned to Lily, whose expression had grown complicated. I was heading to the library to look up some potion materials. Care to join me? Lily glanced at James, who was clearly shaken despite his stubborn silence, then at Regulus, composed and unruffled. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. All right. I've got a potions essay to work on anyway. They walked off together toward the library. James stood there watching their backs, his face pale and flushed by turns, feeling a complete, crushing sense of defeat for the first time. Remus leaned against the wall, staring after Regulus, a tangle of emotions churning inside him. There was even a thread of guilt. Twice now, they had been the ones to provoke him. And Regulus Black, a thoroughbred Slytherin, had never been known for bullying the weak or using underhanded tactics. Compared to that, they, especially James, relied on numbers and superior spell work to torment people they disliked, laughing it off afterward as a joke. Remus stepped forward and hauled James to his feet. Peter scrambled up on his own, eyes still wide with fear, clearly shaken by how decisively it had all ended. James looked awful, as if he had lost something precious. He gripped his recovered wand so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind replayed those few seconds over and over. His spells stopped cold. His wand ripped away. Remus petrified. Peter bound. He had heard the warning. Even so, he had to reclaim his pride. He had to wash away today's humiliation. But that would require better planning, greater power, or a more favorable moment. At the very least, he could not charge in head-on like today again. The thought made his chest feel tight with frustration, his expression dark enough to sour the air. "Let's go," James finally ground out through clenched teeth. He shrugged off Remus's hand and stormed toward Gryffindor Tower, steps heavy and fast. Remus and Peter exchanged a glance and hurried after him. Chapter 34, Bloodlines, Stances, and Reality. In a quiet corner of the library, candlelight cast a warm glow across thick, time-worn pages. Lily Evans finally gave in. She set aside the heavy potions book in her hands and looked up at Regulus across the table, her green eyes intent. "I heard about the duel in the Slytherin common room," she said softly. "Against a fifth year." Her tone carried pure curiosity, free of bias or accusation. "They said you only used basic spells, but the results were completely different. Like we weren't even studying from the same textbooks. How is that possible?" Regulus lifted an eyebrow, mildly surprised she had brought it up. On second thought, it made sense. Details of internal Slytherin affairs rarely leaked. That was an unspoken rule, especially when it came to things like dark magic appearing at welcome gatherings. But Travers picking a fight and losing badly was excellent gossip, and no one felt any urge to shield him. Regulus met her gaze. He could tell that Lily's curiosity held no probing or hostility, only a genuine fascination with magic itself. That made him willing to explain a little more. "The spells themselves are straight from the books," he said calmly. "The difference lies in how you use them. So there's a trick to it. Understanding, proficiency, the body, and awareness." Regulus raised his wand and cast a silencing charm around them. Then he continued. "Understanding means grasping the essence of a spell. What kind of magical force it draws on, what substance or energy it acts upon, and what change it is meant to produce. Proficiency comes from countless repetitions, until the spell becomes almost instinctive. Incantation, wand movement, and magical output all synchronized, without waste or hesitation. The body matters too. Duels are not fought standing still and reciting spells. You need to move to evade attacks, adjust angles to gain better casting positions, and keep your balance so you can respond at any moment. A strong physique and quick reflexes are part of combat power." He paused, then added, "That's something many wizards overlook. And finally, awareness." Candlelight reflected in Regulus's grey eyes, giving them unusual depth. "Anticipating your opponent's intent. Calculating spell trajectories and points of intersection. Making the best possible choice in an instant. In many duels, the clash of minds happens before the clash of spells." He added silently that this applied only to conventional dueling, not to higher-tier magic. It certainly did not apply to everyone. Like Voldemort, Dumbledore, Grindelwald, and someday, himself. Lily sat frozen, absorbing every word. She had never heard a wizard's duel analyzed so clearly, so systematically. At Hogwarts, professors taught incantations and wand movements, emphasized practice, but rarely connected spellcasting so deeply to the caster's overall qualities. For the first time, she felt the outline of a deep divide between Muggle-born students and their peers from ancient wizarding families. She parted her lips, almost asking whether this was not inherently unfair. Children from pure-blood families grew up exposed to these deeper concepts, while people like her. As if reading her thoughts, Regulus shook his head slightly. "This has no necessary connection to being pure-blood. Family inheritance does offer earlier exposure to these ideas, but that is only knowing. Turning knowing into doing requires personal study, practice, and reflection. Many pure-blood wizards stop at knowing. Some even neglect practice out of arrogance. My level comes largely from my own investment." His words were like cold water, dousing the vague resentment stirring in Lily's chest. She suddenly remembered that Professor Slughorn had praised both her and Severus for their talent. They had achieved their results through effort as well. Resources might be unequal, but diligence and intelligence were available to anyone. Regulus was not defending pure-blood monopoly. He was emphasizing the decisive role of individual effort, which made his stance easier to accept. Lily nodded slowly, thoughtful. Still, she could not help wondering how many other purebloods would ever say something like this to her. The conversation drifted deeper. After a moment's hesitation, Lily voiced a question that had been circling her mind for some time. Lately, the atmosphere at school feels strange. Especially in Slytherin, and some upper-year pureblood students in other houses. They whisper about that person, or that great wizard, with this kind of fervor. Is something happening outside? Regulus fell silent for a moment. He knew Lily had grown up in the Muggle world and had limited insight into wizarding affairs, yet her sharpness had picked up on the undercurrent. The most critical information would never be shared with someone of her background. Still, Regulus did not mind saying a little. The wizarding world is on the eve of change, he said carefully, avoiding the name. She would hear it elsewhere, but not from him. A powerful wizard who advocates pureblood supremacy is rising. He has drawn the support of many old families. He believes pureblood wizards should re-establish absolute dominance over the wizarding world and purge impure elements. Lily's eyes widened. That's absurd. Just because of birth. Whether it is absurd depends on one's stance, Regulus replied evenly. For many ancient families, they control most of the wizarding world's wealth, knowledge, and power. That position has lasted for centuries, even millennia. They see it as a natural right granted by bloodline. The growth of half-bloods and Muggleborns threatens to dilute and undermine that purity and those privileges. That wizard's ideology speaks directly to their anxiety and ambition. He looked at Lily seriously. The purebloods you know from other houses, like the Potters, Longbottoms, Pruitts, and Weasleys, may be more open-minded, or more content with the status quo. But Slytherin, and many families closely tied to it, are different. Lily bit her lip and looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. And you? You must support that view too, right? You're a Black. That's practically synonymous with pure blood. Regulus did not answer immediately. He turned to the window, gazing into the deepening night beyond the castle walls, as if seeing the turmoil Hogwarts shut out. Bloodline, he said slowly, is like an old key. It can open certain sealed doors, grant access to resources and perspectives others cannot reach. It represents tradition and vested interests. I will not deny that I benefit from it and make use of what it offers. He turned back to Lily, his gaze frank. But bloodline does not represent wisdom. It does not represent character. It cannot determine a person's entire worth. Throughout history, many wizards who pushed magical progress forward were not pure blood. Reducing everything to blood is lazy and narrow-minded. The stance of many pure blood families is less about belief and more about preserving existing interests and dominance. They monopolize knowledge and resources, reinforce their position through marriage, and form a closed, powerful class. At that point, he could not help adding a private aside in his mind. In his previous life, he had owned a purebred dog. It was pretty and delicate, but not noticeably smarter than the mixed breeds on the street. Listening to this almost ruthless analysis, Lily felt shaken. She had not expected someone from the most illustrious pureblood family to view pureblood status this way. There was no fanaticism, no defense. Only a calm examination rooted in history and interests. It made her reconsider whether Regulus Black truly fit the mold of a typical pureblood boy. If she asked, he would tell her that he could be, or he could not be. For a while after that, they returned to their books. Regulus searched through texts on dermal potion carriers, magical slow-release matrices, and the stability of runic engraving media. The material he was reading went beyond ordinary OWL level and even touched on NEWT topics. At first, Lily was merely curious about what he was looking for. But when Regulus occasionally murmured questions about dense passages or offered incisive commentary, she was once again stunned by the depth of knowledge of someone her own age. She suspected that Regulus was researching a niche and highly advanced subject. "What are you studying?" she asked again, unable to resist. "This material is very specialized." Regulus looked up and thought for a few seconds. Lily's talent in potions was acknowledged by both Professor Slughorn and history itself, and her sharp mind and curiosity could make her a valuable helper. But his true objective could not be revealed. Chapter 35, A Brief History of Soul Magic. "My family is exploring some ancient topical potion formulas," Regulus replied after a moment of thought. "Something similar to old ritual, but safer and more controllable. The goal is to find a potion material that can safely adhere to the skin, steadily carry a specific magical effect, and release it slowly over time. That brings in questions of material compatibility, magical permeability, and long-term stability. Lily's eyes lit up at once. The topic had clearly sparked her academic curiosity. That sounds like expanding potions from internal use to external application, and making them compatible with a wizard's own magic, she said, excitement spilling into her voice. That's fascinating. Can I help? I mean, if you need someone to analyze formulas with you, or test basic material combinations. She volunteered eagerly, her expression bright and restless with interest. Regulus met her gaze and saw nothing there but pure enthusiasm for knowledge. He nodded. If you're interested and willing to put in the time, I do need a reliable collaborator. But it may take up a lot of your free time, and there may not be any visible results in the short term. That's fine. Lily said without hesitation. Being able to work on something like this is a reward in itself, and... She paused, her tone turning sincere. Thank you for being willing to talk to me about all this. About magic, about what's happening outside, and even that essay method you showed me before. It makes me feel like, we're friends, right? Friends help each other. Regulus inclined his head slightly, his voice gentler than before. Yes, friends. I appreciate your help. And if you ever need my perspective or assistance with magic or anything else, just ask. Friendship was never about one-sided giving or taking. It was an exchange and sharing of value. Lily understood. She nodded firmly, a clear smile spreading across her face. When they parted, Regulus added seriously, there's no need to tell anyone else what I said. Lily understood the implications. She nodded solemnly. I promise. Regulus still had preparations to make for the night's plan. He needed to enter the restricted section. An invisibility cloak would have been perfect, but he did not have one. In that case, the disillusionment charm was a good alternative. It was an advanced spell, usually beyond the grasp of younger students. But the Black family library contained detailed records of it, and Regulus had already studied and memorized the principles. The disillusionment charm was not true invisibility. It functioned more like optical camouflage. It demanded fine control of magic and sustained concentration. For Regulus, that was precisely what he had in abundance. He found an abandoned broom closet on the 7th floor of the castle and locked the door behind him. On the first attempt, he focused his mind, spoke the incantation, and guided his magic across the surface of his body. He felt light begin to distort, but the effect was wildly unstable. It was like viewing his body through violently rippling water. His outline blurred and flickered, completely useless for concealment. Failure, the magical output was uneven, and his control over light was too crude. On the second attempt, he adjusted his output, trying to let the magic spread more smoothly over his body. The result was slightly better. His body resembled a patch of badly tinted chameleon skin, clashing with the texture of the surrounding walls. The slightest movement gave him away. Still a failure. His simulation of environmental color and texture was not precise enough. Third attempt. Fourth attempt. He kept adjusting everything. The incantation, the wand movement, the fine details of magical output. He refined how he perceived the surrounding environment, light and shadow, and how he imitated them. On the 5th attempt, he closed his eyes and guided his magic like the finest brush, painting light and shadow across his body to perfectly match the background. When he opened his eyes, the hand he raised before him had almost vanished. Only an outline remained, perfectly aligned with the brickwork behind it. As he moved slightly, the texture shifted in sync. Success. Even so, for Regulus, this level was not enough. Madame Pants relied on sight, perhaps, but what about magical detection? Or even Muggle thermal imaging? Would this hold up? A new idea took shape. Could he construct an ultra-thin isolating layer of magic over his body, one that not only distorted light but also blocked heat, scent, and even magical fluctuations? That was far more difficult than a standard disillusionment charm. It required multi-layered weaving of magic with different properties. He tried again. After 2 more failures, the third attempt worked. He used the light distortion layer of the disillusionment charm as a base. Inside it, he wove an extremely thin inner lining with finer strands of magic. This lining had no offensive or defensive function. Its sole purpose was to absorb and neutralize the faint heat radiation naturally emitted by his body, along with surface-level magical ripples. He felt his presence drop even further in magical perception. It was not complete disappearance, but it was enough to evade most conventional detection. Wizard or Muggle alike. The improved disillusionment charm was complete, at least in its initial form. He dispelled it and exhaled softly. Late at night, the castle itself seemed asleep. Regulus returned to the entrance of the library. The improved disillusionment charm activated silently. His form blended into the dim stone walls of the corridor, nearly imperceptible. Like a shadow without substance, he slipped past sleeping portraits, avoided Filch's patrols, and finally reached the restricted section. Whether by illusion or not, the air there felt colder, thick with the smell of parchment, dust, and old magic. He went straight to a familiar spot, a bottom corner shelf, and found the book he wanted. A brief history of soul magic. Protective charms had been placed on it. Forcing it open or removing it would trigger alarms and might even damage the book. That was no obstacle. He did not need to take it. He extended his right hand, hovering about an inch above the spine, and closed his eyes. His already formidable mind, honed through relentless refinement, surpassed ordinary limits. He expanded his magic like an invisible scanner and began to read. Regulus sensed every trace of magic left on the pages. The author's thoughts and knowledge, infused during the act of writing, had been fixed into the parchment. This method placed an immense strain on the mind and could not perfectly reproduce every detail or nuance of prose. For his current needs, it was enough. Dense, obscure knowledge flooded his consciousness. The nature of the soul and the source of magic. Factors affecting soul stability. Manifestations and consequences of soul damage. Then came the core topic. Soul-splitting theory. As his magic reached that section, it grew especially focused. The book described the feasibility of this forbidden act. Through acts of extreme evil, powerful dark magic, and the utmost blasphemy against life and death, a complete soul could be forcibly torn apart. A fragment would be separated and sealed into a specific vessel. As long as the Horcrux remained intact, even if the physical body was destroyed, the main soul would not truly die. It could persist in some form and potentially rebuild a body through dark rituals. The book issued stern warnings about the horrific consequences. A divided soul would be permanently incomplete, unstable, racked with pain and twisted desires. The process of creating a Horcrux would irreversibly corrode the caster, making them colder, more unhinged, and less human. Moreover, the subtle connection between Horcrux and main soul could itself become a vulnerability. Regulus felt a chill run through him. This confirmed just how dangerous and vile the path Voldemort had chosen truly was. At the same time, another idea became clearer. Soul stability might be the key to safely approaching, or even wielding, dark magic. If a soul were strong and stable enough, like a fortified castle, could it resist the corrosive damage of dark forces? The book mentioned that a handful of powerful, resolute dark wizards seemed to support this theory. They used dark magic frequently without apparent harm. He thought of Dumbledore and Grindelwald. At their level, what difference did dark magic or light magic make? Used was used. Were there consequences? Apparently not. At least, the original novel never mentioned any. Voldemort, on the other hand, had clearly split his soul too early and too often in his pursuit of immortality. He had destroyed the very foundation of his own stability, leading to his eventual madness and inhumanity. Regulus schemed the remaining chapters. Soul attachment involving possession and curse transmission. Soul confinement and the origins of ghosts. Finally, he stopped. Tonight's gains far exceeded his expectations. He had not only confirmed the nature and danger of Horcruxes, but also clarified the importance of soul stability when venturing into the dark domain. At the same time, the additional knowledge about souls opened countless new lines of thought. Chapter 36, Sweet Talking Kids. Sleep after meditation was remarkably effective. When Regulus woke, his mind was clear and alert, his energy abundant. Strength filled his limbs, solid and grounded. Even his breathing felt different, as if magic flowed through him more smoothly with every breath. The kind of progress he could sense almost constantly was intoxicating. Regulus knew this was likely an early-stage surge, the result of his body and mind responding to the unprecedented, systematic stimulation of the star-guided meditation. He also understood that this kind of rapid growth would not last forever. Both body and soul had limits. Once potential was initially unlocked and the foundation reinforced, progress would slow, eventually reaching a stubborn bottleneck. At that point, moving forward might require a qualitative transformation, or the discovery of a new and even more efficient path. For now, though, the road had to be walked step by step, and he allowed himself to enjoy this phase of rapid accumulation. Wednesday afternoon, right after Charm's class, Regulus was holding his books and preparing to head to the library when Cuthbert called out to him. "Regulus," Cuthbert said. His voice held less of its usual casual arrogance. "Can we talk back in the dorm? There's something I need to discuss." Regulus glanced at him and nodded. "All right." When they returned to the Slytherin dormitory, Alex and Hermes were both absent. Cuthbert closed the door. His expression carried a seriousness that did not quite fit his age, mixed with an awkward, distinctly adolescent tension. He cleared his throat before speaking. "My father wrote to me last night." Regulus listened quietly, already having a rough idea where this was going. Cuthbert paused, as if choosing his words, then seemed to steel himself and blurted everything out in one breath. "He said the atmosphere in the Ministry of Magic has been very subtle lately. A lot of old families are adjusting their strategies again. He's heard about how you've been performing at Hogwarts. He specifically mentioned your interaction with that fifth-year Traverse. He thinks that with an heir like you, the Black family could play a more important role in the coming changes. He wants me to stay on good terms with you." The wording was stiff, but the meaning was clear. The Avery family, another long-established pure-blood line, had its current head of house holding an important position within the Ministry of Magic. He was politically sensitive and quick to spot shifts in the wind. Regulus's strength and potential had spread through various channels, drawing the attention of calculating or far-sighted pure-blood families. They were reassessing the Black family's value and looking to establish or reinforce ties through the next generation. Regulus neither confirmed nor denied anything. After finishing, Cuthbert looked at him, visibly tense. In truth, Cuthbert had already been convinced by Regulus on a personal level. The gap in strength between them was undeniable. His family's instruction simply gave him a more legitimate excuse to move closer. At 11, he did not understand political investments or family alliances. His thinking was much simpler. Regulus was strong. Sticking with him was the right call, and it was nothing to be ashamed of. Regulus studied the expression on Cuthbert's face. It was a complicated mix of family duty, genuine respect, and a trace of stubborn pride that refused to bow completely. No matter how refined pure-blood education was, an 11-year-old was still a child. Being able to clearly express "I respect you and want to stand with you" was already rare. After a moment of thought, Regulus spoke. "Cuthbert, we live in the same dorm and attend the same classes. We're already companions. Wanting to stay on good terms is perfectly fine." Then his tone grew more serious. "But there are a few things I need to make clear first." Cuthbert straightened instinctively, as if entering a formal discussion, though he could not quite explain why. Perhaps it was because Regulus's bearing and manner felt more like the adults back home. "First, strength is fundamental. Family prestige gives us a starting point, but true pride should be built on power you command yourself, not just on a surname." That could not have resonated more with Cuthbert. He wanted to prove himself, to earn personal glory beyond his family's shadow. His gaze fixed on Regulus, bright and intent. "Second, learn to observe and think. Slytherin has no shortage of clever people, but cleverness is often misused. Try to look further ahead." The implication was not entirely clear to Cuthbert, but he still nodded firmly. "Third," Regulus said, looking straight at him, "respect basic boundaries, at least in front of me." Cuthbert nodded without hesitation. "I understand. I can do that." He felt that Regulus was not treating him as a mere follower who needed orders. This felt more like an agreement, which put him at ease. After all, he was a pure-blood heir too. With the initial understanding reached, Cuthbert relaxed a little. He lowered his voice and nodded toward the tightly drawn curtains around Hermes's bed. "Regulus, don't you think Mulciber is a bit strange? He's often gone at night, and when he comes back, there's always this weird smell. And during that last duel, he used that kind of..." Regulus followed his gaze to the dark curtains and replied calmly. "Cuthbert, everyone has their own secrets. As long as they have not revealed them voluntarily or caused real harm, offering a degree of privacy and respect is basic courtesy." Then he shifted the focus. "That said, some level of attention is necessary. His behavior is indeed unusual. It may involve less common areas of magic, possibly even curse-related fields. He's at Hogwarts for his own reasons. We do not need to dig into them. Limited awareness is enough. Just avoid being dragged into unnecessary trouble. Cuthbert nodded thoughtfully, though a question lingered in his mind. Was Mulciber already in serious trouble? He had not seen it that way. He thought Hermes was just a dark magic enthusiast. Regulus, meanwhile, was thinking of something else entirely. Hermes Mulciber was gloomy, dangerous, and possessed unconventional dark magic knowledge, with a clear sense of purpose. Treating someone like that as merely a roommate to be wary of would be a waste. He could become a capable executor, provided he could be controlled, or at least bound by a stable relationship built on benefits. Cuthbert could be brought in through displays of insight and superior strength. Hermes, however, would likely require something more direct. Stronger force, and tangible exchanges of benefits. In the same dormitory, privacy was fragile in the face of absolute power. Regulus had no intention of prying into every detail, but he needed to understand Hermes's limits and desires. That way, when the time was right, he could extend an offer of cooperation. The conversation gradually shifted to Alex Rosier. Cuthbert curled his lip. Rosier, he's too soft. Timid, average talent. In our dorm, he feels out of place. The disdain was obvious. Even after Regulus's earlier guidance, Cuthbert's natural arrogance made it hard for him to respect a gentle, slow-moving pureblood from a marginal branch family. Regulus understood this adolescent mindset. Direct lecturing would only provoke resistance. Cuthbert, he said instead, if you wanted to accomplish something big that required many people, say maintaining family honor or achieving a goal, would you rather have more people around you, or fewer? Cuthbert paused. More people, obviously. Regulus continued. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. Alex may not shine in dueling. But he's careful, patient. His notes for potions and herbology are always the most complete, and his grasp of foundational theory is solid. And he comes from the Rosier family. Even as a branch, that represents connections, a stance, and potential strength. Seeing Cuthbert's thoughtful expression, Regulus went on. Power takes many forms. Raw combatability is one. Reliable logistics, accurate information, or even a stance that does not oppose us are also forms of power. Pushing away people who could become part of your strength, simply because of prejudice, is not a wise choice. What Regulus showed Cuthbert was a level of pragmatism and resource integration far beyond that of an ordinary 11-year-old. Cuthbert did not fully grasp all the layers of meaning, but he could not deny that Regulus made sense. Chapter 37, Diamond and Graphite. In Friday's Transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall began teaching them how to turn beetles into buttons. This was a step beyond matches into needles. It involved transforming a living creature into an inanimate object, which demanded far greater precision and a much clearer intent. Most students were struggling with beetles that kept trying to crawl away. The classroom buzzed with faint humming and the soft popping sounds of failed attempts. Regulus picked up his beetle, raised his wand, and spoke the incantation quietly. The beetle stiffened slightly in his palm. The sheen of its shell began to change, shifting from dark brown to a smooth black. Its shape contracted, flattening as the transformation took hold. In barely 3 seconds, a delicate button lay quietly in his hand. Its surface was jet black and glossy, edged with faint spiral patterns. The transformation was seamless. The result was flawless. It even retained a trace of the beetle's original texture, making it more distinctive than an ordinary button. He no longer asked questions beyond the lesson during class. He knew Professor McGonagall regarded him with caution, so there was no need to test boundaries. Silence was sufficient. As she made her rounds, Professor McGonagall stopped at his desk. She picked up the button and examined it carefully. A hint of satisfaction flickered across her stern expression. Mr. Black, a perfect transformation. 5 points to Slytherin, she said with a nod before moving on. After class, Regulus packed his things and prepared to leave, but Professor McGonagall called out to him. Mr. Black, a moment, please. Once the other students had left the classroom, she approached him. Her gaze behind her spectacles was sharp and serious. Your talent in transfiguration is exceptional. Far beyond that of most students your age. Thank you, Professor. I've noticed that lately you've been asking fewer questions in class, she said evenly, giving no hint of her thoughts. Regulus felt a stir of surprise. He had not expected her to raise the point directly. He had assumed a silent understanding was preferable. He replied calmly. Yes, Professor. I reflected on your earlier guidance and felt that, at this stage, I should focus more on solidifying my foundations and mastering the curriculum, rather than delving too early into complex issues that may exceed my current level. Professor McGonagall studied him for several seconds, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. At last, she gave a small nod, her tone softening slightly. A solid foundation is essential. However, if you do develop questions during your studies that are truly worthwhile, grounded in the coursework and carefully thought through, my office door remains open. Hogwarts encourages thinking, but thinking must be built on sufficient knowledge. I understand, Professor. Thank you very much, Regulus said, genuinely surprised. He bowed politely. As he left the classroom, he fell into thought. Since Professor McGonagall had made her position clear, there was no reason for him to hold back. That afternoon, after herbology, he went straight to the Transfiguration Professor's office. He knocked, received permission, and stepped inside. Professor McGonagall was seated behind her desk, marking papers. When she looked up and saw him, her severe expression seemed to ease by the smallest margin. She gestured for him to sit. Mr. Black, what question do you have? She set her quill aside and folded her hands neatly on the desk. Yes, Professor. It's about some thoughts I've had regarding transfiguration. Regulus reached into his bag and took out two objects wrapped separately in soft cloth, laying them out on the desk. One was a piece of graphite, smooth and dark grey, soft enough to leave marks on paper. The other was a small diamond, perfectly cut and scattering brilliant light. I'd like to ask about these two materials, Regulus said, his manner respectful and focused. From certain perspectives, graphite and diamond are thought to be closely related at the most fundamental level, even originating from the same basic element. Their appearance, hardness, luster, and value are worlds apart, but to a master of transfiguration, do they share some kind of internal similarity, or even the possibility of transformation between them? He continued, I've tried to explore the connection through transfiguration. I attempted to turn graphite into diamond, and diamond into graphite. The process is extremely difficult, consumes vast amounts of magic, and is hard to stabilize. It seems to involve more than changing shape or texture. There appears to be something deeper at play, something tied to the stability of a material's internal structure. Regulus knew perfectly well that the difference lay in atomic arrangement and bonding orientation, but that was not something he could reasonably present to Professor McGonagall. What he wanted to understand was how two substances with such drastically different properties, yet composed of the same base material, were perceived by a transfiguration master. And how, in magical terms, they might be transformed. This question clearly lay beyond the textbook. It brushed against the edges of advanced transfiguration and even alchemy. Professor McGonagall's eyes brightened behind her spectacles. She looked at Regulus with evident surprise, as if she had not expected a first year to think along these lines. A very profound and unusual question, Mr. Black, she said, unmistakable approval in her voice. Graphite and diamond. Very few people, especially at your age, consider transfiguration from the perspective of a material's fundamental origins. Normally, we focus on turning matches into needles or beetles into buttons, on changes of form and function, not on whether two seemingly unrelated substances might share a common source. She picked up the graphite, rubbing it lightly between her fingers to feel its slick texture, then examined the diamond. She fell silent for a moment, thinking. In my own transfiguration practice, she said at length, different materials do present distinct magical characteristics. Turning a feather into iron is far more difficult than turning iron into a feather, because the former requires constructing a denser and more stable structure. The two materials you've brought are a striking contrast, yet you've pointed out a possible shared origin. That alone makes the question fascinating. She continued, I have not specifically studied transformations between these two. But from a magical perception standpoint, diamond feels far more rigid, condensed, and orderly than graphite. Graphite, by contrast, feels loose, layered, and prone to slipping. To turn graphite into diamond may require far more than increasing hardness or altering luster. It is more like rebuilding a pile of loose, sliding sheets into a crystal palace where every part is tightly connected. The difficulty far exceeds ordinary changes of form. That's exactly what confuses me, Professor, Regulus said, picking up the thread. In my attempts, I sensed that they share the same most basic substance, but the way it's arranged is completely different. As you said, graphite is loose and layered, while diamond is a fully three-dimensional structure where every point is tightly linked. What transfiguration must accomplish is likely not just a change in appearance. It's a complete rewriting of that fundamental internal structure, forcing one stable state to reconstruct itself into another that is entirely different, yet equally, or even more, stable. Professor McGonagall listened intently, a thoughtful light gleaming in her eyes. Regulus's description offered a highly illuminating perspective, one that approached transfiguration through the internal rules and patterns of material structure. An excellent insight, Mr. Black, she said at last, allowing herself a faint smile. It reminds me of certain advanced magic involving true material transmutation, even, the Philosopher's Stone. She lifted her wand, and the piece of graphite rose gently from the desk. Let's test this idea. She did not recite a long incantation. She simply pointed her wand, her gaze fixed on the graphite. Regulus could feel an immense, pure, and tightly condensed magical force envelop it. Within that magic was an unmistakably clear intent. The intent to reconstruct its internal rules of connection. The graphite began to change at a visible pace. The dark grey color faded rapidly. The material grew impossibly dense and increasingly transparent. Light began to refract within it. Seconds later, a clear crystal with the unmistakable hardness and characteristics of diamond lay on the desk. With another light tap of her wand, the crystal shifted again. Its edges were shaped by unseen forces, refracting light into brilliant fire, until it became a small diamond. The entire process was effortless and stable, far beyond anything Regulus had achieved on his own. This was the power of a true master. Chapter 38, Dumbledore is watching you. As you can see, Professor McGonagall said, when one's understanding of a material's internal structural rules is deep enough, their magic sufficiently strong, and their intent perfectly clear, this kind of transformation is achievable. But as you noted, it is far more difficult than ordinary transfiguration. It requires the caster not only to imagine the target form, but to comprehend and reconstruct its stable inner structure, converting loose, layered connections into a solid three-dimensional framework. Regulus asked at the right moment, Professor, then what about the Philosopher's Stone? She lowered her wand and looked at him. As for the Philosopher's Stone, that is the pinnacle of alchemy, far beyond the scope of ordinary transfiguration. It touches upon the domains of creation and eternity. Gold produced through standard transfiguration often carries a strong imprint of the caster's magic. It is unstable, prone to reverting over time or under powerful magical interference, or it possesses a kind of false essence. Gold refined by the Philosopher's Stone, on the other hand, is said to possess truly eternal material properties. The difference may lie in whether one has genuinely created or permanently fixed the perfect internal structural rules that define gold itself. The discussion benefited Regulus immensely. Professor McGonagall's perspective leaned toward an intuitive understanding of magic and will. His own approach incorporated ways of thinking rooted in modern science. Where the two intersected, his understanding of transfiguration suddenly became much clearer. Your talent and depth of thought in transfiguration are truly impressive, Mr. Black. Professor McGonagall's tone softened. She rose and walked to an old bookshelf, taking down a thick notebook that clearly had some years on it. Regulus noticed the cover at once. It was made of deep blue dragon hide, the sort of thing that made its owner's regard for it obvious at a glance. This contains some insights, conjectures, and lessons learned from failure that I recorded in my youth, when I was exploring higher levels of transfiguration, she said solemnly as she handed it to him. There are no specific spells or techniques inside. It focuses more on reflections about the essence of transfiguration, and on how to perceive and understand an object you wish to transform with greater clarity. I believe it may be of some help to your current studies. Regulus accepted the notebook with both hands. He could feel the gentle warmth of residual magic in the cover, as well as the accumulated wisdom of decades belonging to a rigorous scholar. The value of this gift was beyond measure. Thank you very much, Professor McGonagall, he said earnestly. I hope it will guide you toward the right path, Professor McGonagall replied, her gaze deep. Transfiguration is one of the most direct expressions of magic's power to alter reality. A strong will can reshape matter, but you must always remember that will itself must be guided by wisdom and morality. Never forget that we study magic to understand the world, not merely to dominate or distort it. Yes, Professor. I won't forget, Regulus said. He nodded, understood her meaning, thanked her once more, and left the office. After the door closed, Professor McGonagall remained where she was, staring at it with a complicated expression. The talent and mindset this child had shown were rare even across her many years of teaching. He was calm, sharp, creative, and also capable of restraint and respect, at least on the surface. Yet it was precisely because of this that her concern deepened. Such talent and temperament, if led astray, could cause tremendous harm. I only hope he chooses the right path, she murmured. She returned to her desk, but for a long while, she could not bring herself to resume grading. In the end, Professor McGonagall stood and made her way to the headmaster's office. She spoke the password. The stone gargoyle leapt aside, the spiral staircase carried her upward, and she knocked on the gleaming oak door. "Come in, Minerva," Dumbledore's gentle voice called. Professor McGonagall entered the circular office. As always, it hummed with the soft buzz of strange silver instruments. Portraits of former headmasters pretended to doze while clearly listening in. Fawkes preened his feathers on his perch. "Albus, I need to talk to you about Regulus Black," Professor McGonagall said without preamble. Dumbledore looked at her over his half-moon spectacles, interest flickering in his blue eyes. "Ah, young Mr. Black. I take it he has once again presented my deputy headmistress with a transfiguration problem she found challenging." "It's more than that," Professor McGonagall said, settling into her usual straight-backed chair, her expression grave. "His talent is exceptional. His understanding of transfiguration far exceeds his age, even brushing against areas I rarely examine in depth myself. More importantly, his way of thinking is highly unusual. Structured, precise, and his perspective is elevated. This child is not ordinary, Albus." She went on to recount in detail their discussion about graphite, diamond, and the internal structural rules of matter. Dumbledore listened quietly, his hands folded before him. "And there's more," Professor McGonagall continued, frowning. "I've noticed certain patterns in his behavior. He no longer asks overly advanced questions in class. He presents himself as an exemplary student focused on solidifying his foundations. But I had the house elves keep an eye out, and it turns out he often practices highly refined magic alone in secluded parts of the castle, including nonverbal spells and extremely precise transfiguration. That is far beyond what someone his age should be capable of. Some of it even surpasses the spell work of adult wizards. He's had academic exchanges with Lily Evans of Gryffindor in the library, and has even taught her methods of Muggle academic writing. With his classmates, he maintains a surface-level distance, but the boy named Cuthbert Avery seems to be starting to follow him. Regulus's response has been a measured acceptance and guidance, not simple exploitation." Dumbledore nodded slightly. "Yes, Minerva. I've noticed these things as well." "You knew?" Professor McGonagall looked at him. "Of course you did. How could you not? This castle," Dumbledore said with a smile, his gaze sweeping over the supposedly sleeping portraits, "has many eyes and ears. And I do take a special interest in young Mr. Black. From the day he arrived, the Sorting Hat passed along some intriguing impressions. It said that he looks to the stars, beyond mundane conflicts, yet still chose the path of Slytherin." He paused, his voice calm and perceptive. "He is different from his brother, Sirius. Sirius's rebellion is fire. Bright, fierce, and direct. Regulus, on the other hand, appears calm on the surface, but may harbor complex thoughts and unknown intentions beneath. His hunger for knowledge is genuine. His pursuit of power is clear. Yet he seems to operate by his own standards and internal logic. That's exactly what worries me," Professor McGonagall said. "He has talent, ideas, and the ability to conceal and calculate. If he were to be drawn to dark ideologies, we cannot choose our students' paths for them, Minerva," Dumbledore said gently but firmly. "All we can do is offer knowledge, set examples, and intervene to guide or correct when necessary. So far, Regulus Black has shown no behavior that crosses any lines. His interactions with Lily Evans are based on mutual respect and friendship. His way of restraining Cuthbert Avery resembles guidance rather than indulgence. His exploration of transfiguration is deep, yes, but it has not entered dangerous territory." He looked out at the darkening sky, his gaze distant. "Voldemort's shadow is drawing closer. Many ancient families are making their choices, and the Black family will not be able to stand apart. Regulus stands in the middle of it all. Every choice he makes will affect not only himself, but possibly many others. We cannot foresee the future, but we can observe, and we can prepare. Do you think he will be different? Professor McGonagall asked. Dumbledore fell silent for a moment before speaking slowly. The starry sky the Sorting Hat saw may have been a metaphor. It could signify ambition, or it could represent a broader vision and higher aspirations. The way he views magic differs from most. That could be dangerous, or it could be an opportunity. Time will give us the answer, Minerva. Until then, let us continue to fulfill our duties as professors. Teach him, watch him, and when necessary, ensure that he does not harm others, or himself. The conversation ended. Professor McGonagall's unease had not fully faded, but the headmaster's words brought her some measure of calm. At the very least, Dumbledore was watching that child as well. Chapter 39, My Own Understanding of Transfiguration. Back in the dormitory, seated at his desk, Regulus gently ran his fingers over the cover of Professor McGonagall's notebook. He flipped through a few pages. Just as she had said, there were no concrete spells inside, only dense reflections on the essence of transfiguration. One section discussing gradients of difficulty in material transformation caught his attention. Professor McGonagall argued that the difficulty of transfiguration was not determined solely by an object's complexity. It was far more closely tied to the inherent stability of a material's internal structure, as well as the strength of its form memory. Combining today's discussion with his own experiments, Regulus found himself arriving at a fairly solid conclusion. Transforming elemental substances was harder than changing one complex compound into another, especially when the transformation involved a fundamental alteration of the material's original properties. Turning a wooden stick into an iron rod meant converting one established organic structure into a metallic crystal structure. In essence, it was a shift from one fixed framework to another fixed framework. Many young wizards could manage that, even if most only succeeded in altering the outward form. But transforming graphite into diamond was different. It meant changing one form of elemental carbon into another. Without altering the base element itself, one had to completely reconstruct its internal connections, or in other words, rearrange its molecular structure, to produce two substances with radically different physical properties. This demanded understanding and reshaping matter at its most microscopic level, and the difficulty far exceeded ordinary changes of shape. Regulus took out a small piece of graphite he carried with him and began to practice. He let his magical perception sink deep into the graphite, trying to pry at the stacked layers within, forcing localized distortions and cross-links to form a tiny region of increased hardness and altered luster. The process was brutally difficult. Graphite's loose, layered structure had a peculiar tendency to slip. When magic interfered, entire layers often shifted together, making localized reconstruction nearly impossible. One careless moment could destroy the overall integrity, reducing it to nothing more than fluffy carbon powder. He had to exert extraordinarily fine control, like wielding the most delicate carving blade, engraving and welding at the molecular level. It gave him a deeper appreciation for wizards and magic alike. Wizards might not have developed a scientific system based on experimentation and mathematics the way Muggles had to understand the world and matter at the microscopic scale, but they were by no means inferior. Professor McGonagall, with only brief observation, could accurately discern the internal differences between graphite and diamond. That kind of intuitive perception of a material's essence was something Muggle technology still struggled to approach. Of course, Regulus himself was a special case. His foundation in basic sciences from a previous life, combined with an unusually sharp magical perception after his rebirth, gave him an advantage. Professor McGonagall, by contrast, relied solely on experience and magical intuition to reach similar conclusions. The gap between them was measured in decades immersed in transfiguration. This also clarified the next step on the path forward. Transfiguration was not merely about altering form. One had to understand the underlying principles, and ultimately reach the point of changing a thing's very essence. An alchemy, the legendary kind, the kind represented by the Philosopher's Stone and its pinnacle of achievement, it likely touched upon something far more terrifying. That went beyond rearranging molecular structures. It probably involved reconstruction at an even more fundamental level. Turning stone into gold might require altering the number of protons in an atomic nucleus, or at the very least perfectly simulating every chemical bond and macroscopic property of a gold atom. That was completely outside the realm of transfiguration. The fact that it could also grant longevity and extend life spoke to the vast power contained within it. Even Voldemort sought to use it to return from death. During a pause in his practice, his thoughts continued to wander. The air itself was filled with elemental substances and compounds. Nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, water vapor, noble gases. Yet most wizarding magic, whether defensive spells, offensive spells, or everyday charms, did not deliberately filter or block the subtle changes in these invisible components of the air. It was not because it could not be done. The difficulty was minimal. It was simply something people instinctively ignored. Take oxygen, for instance. A sudden idea surfaced. What if the elemental oxygen in the air surrounding a human body were instantly transformed, through transfiguration, into another oxygen-based substance the body could not use? Ozone, for example. Or conversely, other substances could be transformed into oxygen, inhaled, and then reverted after gas exchange. Glass fibers, asbestos, radioactive elements. Anything would do. The key lay in extremely precise identification and instantaneous conversion of a specific elemental substance. For now, it was only theoretical deduction, but the direction was certainly correct. While Regulus was immersed in microscopic transfiguration and dangerous extrapolations, the dormitory door opened, and Cuthbert Avery returned. He saw Regulus seated at his desk, a small, twisted object hovering in front of him. At the tip of Regulus's wand flowed a fine, tightly condensed light. It was clearly some form of magical practice. Transfiguration? The hay that rose to Cuthbert's lips was swallowed immediately. He considered himself on Regulus's side now and understood that interruptions were unwelcome. He moved quietly to his own bed and set his books down. Not long after, Alex came back as well, arms full of books, his face relaxed after finishing his homework. He spotted Regulus and instinctively went to greet him, but the moment he opened his mouth, Cuthbert raised a finger sharply to his lips, shot him a fierce look, then tilted his chin toward Regulus. Alex startled and clapped a hand over his mouth. Following Cuthbert's gaze, he saw Regulus deep in practice. He fell silent at once and carefully made his way to his bed, feeling oddly reassured. Cuthbert still carried himself with that familiar arrogance, but this time he had only stopped Alex with a gesture instead of knocking him down with Petrificus totalis or stupefy. Alex could not help but feel that the atmosphere in the dormitory truly had changed. Before, Cuthbert had been domineering, Hermes unpredictable and gloomy, Regulus distant and silent, while Alex himself lived on edge. Now, although the hierarchy was still clear, Cuthbert no longer bullied people at will, and Regulus, despite his strength, was not overbearing. Alex suspected the change had a lot to do with Regulus's presence and influence. Thinking of the recent letters from home, his parents had, as always, urged him to study well, take care of himself, and get along with his classmates. There was no need to force his way into the core circles. Staying safe was enough. Alex felt a quiet gratitude toward Regulus. On the fringes of Slytherin's inner circle, Regulus had, without fanfare, created a space where one could at least breathe. Regulus noticed his roommates returning and the subtle movements in the room, but he did not let it distract him. His mind was racing, magic pouring out as he maintained delicate control over the graphite's internal structure. With Professor McGonagall's demonstration and notes as guidance, transfiguration based on molecular arrangement now had a clear entry point for him, though putting it into practice still demanded enormous effort. The last to return was Hermes. He pushed the door open, bringing in a trace of cold from outside. His gaze went first to Regulus practicing, then to Cuthbert's faintly provocative gesture of restraint, and Alex's cautious posture. A nearly imperceptible curl of mockery tugged at Hermes's lips. He had little regard for Cuthbert's eager submission and even looked down on it. He had lost to Regulus in the chief duel and been shocked when his immature magic was effortlessly neutralized, but deep down, his confidence remained intact. He believed he still had many cards left unrevealed. Those were the true sources of power. At school, many methods were inconvenient to display. Outside the castle, in an unrestricted fight to the death, Hermes believed that with the truly dark magic passed down through his family, he might not lack the chance to kill Regulus. Several spells flashed through his mind, inherited or obtained through secret channels. Chapter 40, Transfiguration, Mate. Hermes took one look at the odd little object in Regulus's hand and wrote it off. Sure, fundamentals mattered. He could admit that much. Regulus's basics were terrifyingly solid. But Hermes had his own stubborn belief. Real combat came down to one thing, whether you had magic strong enough to decide life and death in one move. The transfiguration and classroom spells they learned at school were flashy tricks at best when real dark magic showed up. He could not see what Regulus was even practicing, let alone the danger buried in that tiny, precise restructuring of matter. To Hermes, it was just making a stone a little harder or shinier. So what? What were you supposed to do in a duel, beat someone with a polished rock? Ridiculous. Cuthbert tried to signal him to shut up. Hermes ignored him and made his footsteps deliberately heavy. He walked to his bed and dropped an old blank-covered book onto the bedside table. Thump. The dull impact sounded extra loud in the quiet dorm. That finally dragged Regulus out of deep focus. He let the magic around the graphite disperse. The stone returned to normal and fell back to the desk. Then he looked up. Grey eyes, calm and flat, landing on Hermes. Need something? Regulus asked. Hermes turned and leaned on the bedpost, his usual gloom now edged with a little provocation. Not really. Just seems like a waste, some people spending their time on flashy little tricks. Real power isn't molding rocks into pretty shapes. The jab was obvious. Cuthbert frowned. Alex lowered his head and said nothing. Regulus answered evenly, your view of power is extreme, and way too narrow. You only notice destruction and pain. You miss the strength inside the rules this world is built on. And perspective. He shook his head. You probably don't know this, but the wizard most widely recognized as the strongest today, Albus Dumbledore, is also a top-tier transfiguration master. Hermes's expression tightened. Of course he knew the name Dumbledore. What Dumbledore specialized in was something a dark magic-obsessed first year had never cared to learn. One more thing. Regulus stood. At some point his wand had already slipped into his hand. He happened to need a live target for a thought he'd just formed, and Hermes had handed him one. You don't think much of my magic, Regulus said. Coincidentally, I don't think yours is impressive either. Before the last word fully landed, Regulus lifted his wand and pointed it at Hermes. Hermes reacted fast, reaching for his own wand to block or counter. Regulus was faster. Or rather, the way his spell worked ignored what Hermes expected a spell to look like. There was no flash, no sound. Nothing at all. Hermes suddenly felt his breathing lock up. The air entering his nose and mouth lost every property that made it breathable. It was like sucking in something useless, something that would not interact with his lungs, would not give him even a trace of oxygen. His eyes flew wide. His mouth opened as he tried to drag in more air, but it did nothing. The panic came fast, then faster. He tried to speak, to demand what Regulus had done, but no sound came out. He tried to raise his wand, but oxygen starvation blurred his thoughts and made his arms feel like lead. And he could not cast nonverbal spells. He stared at Regulus in raw terror. Regulus held his wand steady, expression blank, like he wasn't looking at a person at all. This was an extension of Regulus's earlier idea. He had not attempted complicated elemental conversion. At his current level, that would be too slow. What he did was rougher and more direct. He did not define a precise end state. He only set a condition. Using broad, non-targeted transfiguration, he forced a high-output magical intervention and turned the gas in that area into something unbreathable. At this stage, it was more practical than converting oxygen directly into poison. He wasn't trying to kill anyone. Cuthbert watched with shining eyes. He didn't understand the mechanism and wasn't even sure this counted as dark magic, but that only made Regulus look more terrifying to him. If he couldn't understand it, it had to be a higher level. Alex, meanwhile, had gone pale. He clapped both hands over his mouth, afraid to make even a sound. He'd just started feeling like dorm life was getting better. In a blink, it turned into this. They were first years. This wasn't a normal classmate scuffle. It looked like the beginning of a killing. He watched Hermes's face shift from red to blue, eyes bulging, body twitching, and fear flooded his chest. Hermes's panic peaked. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't cast. Under the crushing combo of suffocation and terror, his magic wouldn't gather at all. Death felt close. Close enough to touch. He desperately tried to identify the spell. What was this? Silent, invisible, bizarre in function, stripping away the basis of life itself. It had to be some horrifying advanced dark magic. He had lost completely. He didn't even understand what method he'd been hit with. Seconds crawled. Around the half-minute mark, Hermes's struggles weakened. His eyes started to lose focus. Even Cuthbert, excited at first, felt cold sweat break out. He worshipped power, sure, but he understood limits. Killing a student on campus, especially someone from the Mulcyber family, would be a total disaster. Everything would blow up. He opened his mouth, ready to beg Regulus to stop. Then he saw Regulus's face, calm to the point of chilling, no frenzy, no madness, and swallowed the words. Instinct told him Regulus wouldn't cross that line. Someone this composed, this rational, someone who calculated each step, wouldn't kill over a dorm room argument. Right when Hermes was about to black out, Regulus gave a small flick of his wrist and withdrew the magic. Ha! Hermes collapsed forward, catching himself on both hands, sucking in air like a broken bellows. He coughed violently. Tears and mucus ran down his face in a miserable mess. It took him over a minute of desperate gasping before he could even lift his head. His bloodshot eyes, full of fear and disbelief, locked onto Regulus. Regulus had already put his wand away. He looked down at Hermes and asked, calm as ever, so, what do you think of transfiguration now? He offered no explanation. Let Hermes guess. Let him fear, let him claw at the principle behind this invisible, formless, lethal thing. Hermes stayed slumped on the floor, body trembling from leftover terror. His thoughts were a mess. Transfiguration? How was that possible? Transfiguration could make him unable to breathe? That overturned everything he thought he knew about the subject. But if it wasn't transfiguration, then what was it? There was no sinister dark magic aura, no curse-like feeling. The unknown only made him more afraid. He realized he couldn't see through Regulus Black at all. Regulus didn't just crush him with raw ability. He also seemed to command methods Hermes couldn't understand, couldn't even classify. Against techniques like that, there was no defense. Cuthbert finally let out a breath, only for it to turn into a stronger rush of pride and resolve. Look at this. This was the person he chose to follow. Powerful, clear-headed, and unfathomable. Then his mind started working. If he had to face that move himself, what could he do? Set up a bubblehead charm in advance? Keep defensive magic active all the time? Too passive. Alex also relaxed a little, though his legs were still weak. Seeing Hermes collapsed on the floor and Regulus standing there perfectly calm, he finally understood who the real danger in this storm was. Silently, he promised himself he'd watch every word and action from now on, and never provoke Regulus. Regulus ignored the mess of thoughts around him. He sat back down at his desk, mind still turning. That short test confirmed one of his assumptions. Manipulating the basic substances present everywhere in the environment was a blind spot in most wizards' thinking, and a direction with huge offensive potential. But what if he pushed it one step further?
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.